Chapter 529. The Xuanzong disciple followed Qing Xuanzi's gaze and asked, "Did that person offend you, senior brother?" Qing Xuanzi said coldly, "This person dared to insult me. I can't take this lying down." The Xuanzong disciple looked at Qing Xuanzi and shook his head. "Since this person insulted you, senior brother, just return the favor. Why do you need to investigate his background? No matter how powerful he is, can he be more powerful than you, senior brother?" Before Qing Xuanzi could speak, Qing Songzi said indifferently, "Who are you, senior brother? You're the leader of the fourth-generation disciples of Xuanzong. No matter what his background is, whether he's a disciple of the five sects, a disciple of an aristocratic family, or a royal family of a country, can he be more powerful than you, senior brother?" Qing Xuanzi looked at his junior brother with a glint in his eyes. Qing Songzi was right. He was one of the 10 core disciples of Xuanzong. As the head of the 6 Taoist sects, Xuanzong was above the secular imperial power. The core disciples of the other 5 sects couldn't be compared to him in terms of status. As for those aristocratic families and the secular imperial family, they couldn't be compared to Xuanzong. What did he have to be afraid of? As if he thought of something, he looked at Qing Songzi and said indifferently, "Junior brother, you seem to want me to have a conflict with this person." Qing Songzi shrugged and said helplessly, "What are you thinking, senior brother? I just think that you're too cautious and you're embarrassing Xuanzong. If you're worried that this person has a powerful background and you don't dare to provoke him, I'll help you find someone to investigate him. But it might take some time, so please be patient, senior brother." Qing Xuanzi waved his hand and said coldly, "No need to investigate. Why would I be afraid of a nobody?" Seeing Qing Xuanzi leave, Qing Songzi raised his hands and sneered in his heart, "Idiot who only thinks with his lower body. He's just relying on a good master. What right does he have to be one of the 10 core disciples? Let's see if you can afford to offend someone who can ride a dragon." As Li Mu led Wan and the others to continue strolling around the market, the number of gazes on him increased. Some discussions and speculations about his identity also began to increase. Some people said that he was a disciple of a cultivation clan, some said that he was a prince of some royal family, and some said that he was a core disciple of one of the 5 sections. Although his seniority in the Fulu school was high, he did not show his face often. As for the other sects, other than a few elders and heads, basically no one had seen him before. Li Mu wandered around for a while with the intention of finding a few treasures. Soon, he was disappointed to find that although there were many strange things here, most of them were useless. However, he saw some materials that could be used to write heavenly secret talismans. Li Mu walked in front of a small stall selling elixirs, casually picked a few stalks and asked, "How much are these?" The stall owner calculated and said, 500 spiritual jades. "You can take all of them." Li Mu picked up a white stick that was about half an arm's length. It looked like jade and stone, but it was not stone. He placed it in the pile of elixirs and said, "Many of these elixirs are not old enough. 500 spiritual jades is too expensive. I'm too lazy to bargain with you. Including this, I'll give you 500 spiritual jades." In fact, the stall owner did not know what the white object was. It was something he accidentally dug out from the ground 2 years ago. It was abnormally hard and did not have much spiritual qi. It had been left here for a long time, and no one wanted it. After thinking about it, he waved his hand and said, "I'll give it to you." He saw clearly that this person had just thrown out 20,000 spiritual jades, so his price was indeed a little high. These elixirs were worth, at most, 400 spiritual jades. Seeing that the other party did not bargain, he did not lose anything by giving him something worthless. Li Mu picked up the white object and put it away first. It was actually a spiritual bone. On the surface, it did not have much spiritual qi, but after it was ground into powder, it was a material for writing high-level Fulu. Judging from the appearance, the owner of this bone was at least at the 6th Dongxian, if not the 7th realm transcendence. Li Mu was about to put away these elixirs when a voice suddenly came from the side. "I'll take these elixirs for 600 spiritual jades." Li Mu turned to look at Qing Xuanzi, who was expressionless. The stall owner naturally wanted to sell more spiritual jades, but he had already promised someone. If it were someone else, he might still reluctantly sell to the young man who made the first bid. However, this was Qing Xuanzi, Xuanzong's core disciple. He could not afford to offend him in Xuanzong's territory. He was in a dilemma. Li Mu saw the stall owner's dilemma and said with a smile, "In that case, let him have this elixir." The stall owner breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, "Thank you, young master. I'll give it to you as an apology." Li Mu did not even look at Qing Xuanzi and continued to pick up treasures. One moment, he had his eyes on a flying sword. The next moment, he had his eyes on a bottle of medicinal pills. And the next moment, he had his eyes on a cultivation technique. However, every time he wanted to buy it, Qing Xuanzi would step in and buy it at a price that was 100 spirit jades higher than his. Li Mu would always give in. Wan gritted her teeth and said, "This person is too hateful. He always steals what we want." Li Mu smiled and said, "It's okay. The highest bidder gets it. This is the rule. As long as he has enough spiritual jades, he can buy everything here." Many people in the market had already seen that Qing Xuanzi and the unidentified young man were fighting. Every time, the young man would snatch the items that the young man wanted. At first, they thought that the two of them would have a conflict because of this. However, the young man seemed to be very magnanimous. After being robbed by Qing Xuanzi several times, he was not angry at all. After watching for a while, everyone saw the clues. It was not that the young man was magnanimous. He was clearly toying with Qing Xuanzi. He deliberately pretended to be interested in those items. His goal was to waste Qing Xuanzi's spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi was a core disciple of Xuanzong. Although his cultivation was high, he obviously did not know the ways of the world. He thought that he had benefited, but in fact, he had been played like a monkey. Qing Xuanzi followed behind Li Mu and gradually realized that something was wrong. Seeing the expressions of the people around him and the whispers in the distance, his face became even gloomier. When he saw Li Mu pick up another flying sword and was about to pay the stall owner with spiritual jades, he did not make a move, which was rare. Seeing that Qing Xuanzi did not make a move, Li Mu put away the spiritual jades that he had already taken out and said to the stall owner apologetically, "I'm sorry, I suddenly don't want them." When Qing Xuanzi saw this, how could he not know that he had been toyed with? His face was livid, and he wanted to draw his sword and fight this person. However, he also knew that he was not in the right now. Once he made a move, even if he won, he would be talked about. He took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed his anger. Seeing that Qing Xuanzi did not fall for it, Li Mu walked to a small stall. The stall owner was a middle-aged man with a cultivation at the third realm. His hair was messy, and his beard was unshaven. He looked rather sloppy. Li Mu pointed at an item on the stone table in front of him and asked, "How much is this?" The stall owner was fiddling with a pile of items on the stone table. He looked up at Li Mu, then lowered his head again and said softly, 1,000 spiritual jades. As soon as he said that, there was a burst of laughter from the surroundings. "He wants to sell this lousy item for 1,000 spiritual jades? He must be crazy for spiritual jades. I've already seen him selling here for 10 years. In the 2 exchanges, he didn't sell a single item. He's really determined to come again this year. Of all the things he can do with 1,000 spiritual jades, which idiot would spend 1,000 spiritual jades on a pile of junk?" The middle-aged stall owner turned a deaf ear to everyone's mockery and continued fiddling with the items in his hands. Li Mu picked up the item that he had his eyes on and continued to ask, "How do I use this?" The middle-aged man looked up at him again and said, "Fill it with spiritual jade from the back and activate it with dermic powers. Then you can attack from the front." Li Mu looked at the item in his hands. Although it was small, it was heavy. The back was square, and the front was a hollow iron cylinder. Li Mu put it down and said, "I'll take it for 1,000 spiritual jades." The middle-aged man's hands paused. He did not expect that someone would really spend 1,000 spiritual jades to buy his item. Not far behind Li Mu, Qing Xuanzi had a vigilant look on his face. He subconsciously thought that this person was setting him up again, wanting him to spend a large amount of spiritual jades to buy such a useless item. However, if this was really a treasure, wouldn't this person be taking advantage of it for nothing? After careful consideration, he walked up and said calmly, "I'll give you 1,001 spiritual jades." He only had one spiritual jade more than this person. One spiritual jade could not do anything, but it could cause greater humiliation to this person. Li Mu did not give it to Qing Xuanzi this time. He said calmly, 2,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi said, 2,001 spiritual jades. Li Mu hesitated for a moment and said again, 3,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi did not hesitate. 3,001 spiritual jades. Li Mu looked furious. He looked at Qing Xuanzi and said angrily, "What are you trying to do?" The angrier Li Mu was, the happier Qing Xuanzi felt. He glanced at Li Mu and said calmly, "It just so happens that I have my eyes on this item as well. The highest bidder gets it. Even if it's one spiritual jade higher, it's still high." A useless piece of trash was actually bid 3,000 spiritual jades by two people. The onlookers were dumbfounded. Was this the world of rich people? Li Mu looked extremely pained. He squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. For 1,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi also hesitated for a moment this time, but when he saw Li Mu's expression, he said decisively, 4,001 spiritual jades. The pained and conflicted expression on Li Mu's face melted like spring rain after Qing Xuanzi shouted that number. He smiled at Qing Xuanzi and said, "Congratulations, the treasure is yours." Chapter 530. In the market, when Qing Xuanzi bought the treasure with 4,000 spiritual jades, the crowd was stunned for a moment, and then there was a lot of laughter. It was not common to see a core disciple of Xuanzong being played like this so many times. Qing Xuanzi stood there in a daze, and his face turned from green to black. He was played again. This damn guy made him spend 4,000 spiritual jades to buy a piece of trash. Hearing the laughter around him, Qing Xuanzi's face sank. He took out 40 mid-grade spiritual jades and one low-grade spiritual jade and placed them on the stone table in front of the stall owner. Although he was distressed and angry, he had to pay the spiritual jades. Otherwise, he would lose Xuanzong's face. At this moment, his hatred for the person in front of him was monstrous. He took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He looked at the stall owner and asked, "How do I use this?" The stall owner put away the spiritual jades and pointed at a groove behind the item. He said, "Inlay a spiritual jade here and activate it with spiritual power. It will launch an attack from here." Qing Xuanzi did as he was told and inlaid a low-grade spiritual jade into the groove behind the item. He aimed the metal cylinder at the front at the empty space in the distance and activated it with spiritual power. The spiritual jade disappeared instantly, but there was no attack from the metal cylinder. Instead, the item in his hand exploded. Although Qing Xuanzi put up a shield in time and was not injured, he still looked very embarrassed. The middle-aged stall owner looked at the mess on the ground and shook his head. Failed again. At this moment, Qing Xuanzi's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He spent 4,000 spiritual jades to buy the item, and with just one explosion, not only did he lose the spiritual jades, but he also lost face in front of so many people. Most importantly, in order to maintain his composure, he could only suppress all his anger and stay here. Because if he left, he did not know what the people here would say about him behind his back. He pretended as if nothing happened and continued to walk around the nearby stalls, but he was a little further away from Li Mu. After many exchanges, he did not gain the upper hand, so he chose to temporarily retreat. Li Mu was still standing in front of the middle-aged man's stall. The middle-aged man looked at him and said, "What else do you want? I'll make it clear first. Once the items here are sold, they are not refundable. Think carefully before you buy." Li Mu looked at the pile of things on the table and said, "I don't want these things." The middle-aged man looked up and asked, "Then what are you still doing here?" Li Mu looked at him and said, "I want you." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment. He shrank back and asked, "What do you mean?" Li Mu picked up an item that was very similar to the one Qing Xuanzi had just bought and asked the middle-aged man, "This item wasn't originally this big, right?" The middle-aged man's dispirited eyes suddenly lit up. You know these things too? Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't understand. I'm just slightly interested, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they look like after they grow up. I'm even more looking forward to seeing more types of them. They can run on the ground, fly in the sky, swim in the water. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, that would require a lot of spiritual jades, a lot of manpower, and a lot of materials. Li Mu smiled and said, I lack everything, but I don't lack people, spirit jades, or materials. The middle-aged man breathed quickly and said, if you can provide me with these things, I'll give you my life. Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't want your life. If you need these things, come to the Department of Worship in the divine capital of Great Zhou and find me. My name is Li Mu. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment. He looked up and said, you can call me Immortal. Li Mu raised his eyebrows. The successor of the Mahist? The middle-aged man lowered his head and said with a complicated tone, I didn't expect that there would still be people who remember the Mahist. Not long after, Li Mu walked in the market. Wan held Li Mu's arm and asked in confusion, young master, what did you mean by what you said to that person? Li Mu smiled and didn't explain too much. He only said, he is a very capable person. I invited him to work for the imperial court. After walking around the various streets and seeing that they were not as curious as before, Li Mu planned to take them to the Fulu school shop here. He had just taken 2 steps when his right wrist was suddenly gripped tightly. He looked to his right and found that Chung Xian was holding his hand tightly. Her eyes were fixed on a stall. That stall sold all kinds of cultivation books. There were Fulu basics, alchemy basics, and array basics. Chung Xian's gaze was fixed on one of the books. It was a thin book, but there were only a few crooked glyphs on the book. Li Mu didn't recognize a single word. He knew the Great Zhou language, the Shun language, and the Yao language, but he had never seen the one in front of him. Chung Xian didn't say anything, but she had already conveyed her intentions to Li Mu. Li Mu walked toward the stall, but a figure beat him to it. Qing Xuanzi walked to the stall and picked up the thin book. He asked the stall owner, how much is this book? The stall owner bought this strange book from the secular world with a few taels of silver. He didn't recognize the words on it. Seeing that the other party was a disciple of Xuanzong, he wanted to curry favor with him. He smiled and said, if you want it, 100 spiritual jades will do. Qing Xuanzi didn't recognize the words either. He just felt that the book was strange and wanted to buy it to ask his master. He had just taken out the spiritual jades when a voice came from behind him. I'll pay 1,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi looked back and saw Li Mu. Anger appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, I'll pay 2,000. Li Mu's expression didn't change. 3,000. Qing Xuanzi gritted his teeth. 4,000. Li Mu continued to raise the price. 5,000. Qing Xuanzi threw the book into Li Mu's arms and sneered. This is yours. Earlier, this person asked him to pay 4,000 spiritual jades for a piece of trash. Now, he asked this person to pay 5,000 spiritual jades for something that was worth 100 spiritual jades. He was very happy, and even half of his anger disappeared. However, when he saw Li Mu pay the spiritual jades directly, he felt that something was wrong. He wasn't as excited as before. The stall owner didn't care about that. He liked these 2 guests too much. He got 5,000 spiritual jades for free. This trip to Xuanzong was complete. He was worried that the other party would go back on his word, so he immediately packed up and left as fast as he could. The people around shook their heads. Although this mysterious young man was smart, he still fell for Qing Xuanzi's trick this time and lost 5,000 spiritual jades for nothing. They had never seen 5,000 spiritual jades in their lives. Li Mu walked to Chung Xian and asked her with uncertainty, are you sure this book is worth 5,000 spiritual jades? Can you understand it? Chung Xian whispered, of course, this is the secret text of the dragon race. Li Mu was stunned for a moment, then asked what's written on it. Chung Xian didn't translate for him. Instead, she bit the tip of her finger and dripped a drop of blood on it. After her blood dripped on the page, it disappeared. At the same time, the thin book in Li Mu's hand suddenly emitted a strange aura. Li Mu was too familiar with this aura. This was the aura of the heavenly book. Almost instantly, he put the book into the pot. However, the moment the aura spread out, many people around still felt it. What's that? That aura is too mysterious. Treasure. It's actually a treasure. The cultivators in the market were shocked. They thought that the young man was tricked by Qing Xuanzi. No one would have thought that it was actually a treasure. The aura just now was so mysterious. This book must be a great treasure, and its value far exceeded 5,000 spiritual jades. Qing Xuanzi was completely dumbfounded. He was completely stunned on the spot. At this moment, he could no longer suppress the anger in his heart and vented it all out. With a thought, a flying sword floated above his head. The flying sword shone brightly and attacked Li Mu. Qing Xuanzi followed closely behind and roared, "Thief, give me back my treasure!" Facing Qing Xuanzi's aggressive flying sword, Li Mu didn't do anything, but Qing Xian beside him couldn't stand still. She took a step forward, and a giant dragon shadow rushed out of her body. The shadow let out a dragon's roar and collided with the flying sword. The flying sword was sent flying back, and the sword light immediately dimmed. Qing Xuanzi spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were wide open as he looked at Qing Xian and said in horror, "Dragon race." The market was instantly in an uproar. Dragon race. That girl is actually a dragon. Oh my God. I actually saw a true dragon in my lifetime. I know. She's the giant dragon we saw at sea. That dragon is exactly the same as this shadow. Then this young master is the powerhouse riding the dragon. Who is he? He's so rich that he even has a dragon mount. After Qing Xuanzi and Qing Xian released their auras without restraint, a few figures suddenly flew out from the Immortal Mountain hanging upside down in the sky. Their voices were heard before they arrived. Who is so bold to be so presumptuous in my Xuanzong? An old man flew down from above. Someone in the market blurted out, "It's Elder Hua Yangzi. His cultivation is only one step away from Dongxian, far surpassing Qing Xuanzi. This person is in trouble." Amidst the discussion, the old man floated over. However, when he flew to the market and saw Li Mu, his originally tense face immediately became respectful. He cupped his fists and said, "Hua Yangzi greets Uncle Masterly." Seeing Elder Hua Yangzi of Xuanzong respectfully saluting this young man, the crowd was stunned. Uncle Master? This mysterious powerhouse with a true dragon mount was Elder Hua Yangzi's Uncle Master. Wasn't that the same seniority as the sect master of Xuanzong? Qing Xuanzi was even more shocked and frightened. Hua Yangzi was his Uncle Master. Didn't that mean he had to call Hua Yangzi his Uncle Master? Li Mu didn't know many of the elders of Xuanzong. Other than Immortal Miao Dun, there were only the 5 people who had been to Emperor Bai's cave residence. The old man in front of him was one of the 5. Li Mu glanced at him with one hand behind his back. He looked at Qing Xuanzi and said lightly, "Xuanzong has taught a good disciple." Chapter 531. Hua Yangzi knew very well that although Li Mu was young, he was a second-generation disciple of Fulu School and was above them in terms of seniority. However, Qing Xuanzi was also a core disciple that Xuanzong focused on. He hesitated for a moment and said to Qing Xuanzi, "Qing Xuanzi, if you have offended Martial Uncle Li in any way, apologize to him quickly. I believe that Martial Uncle Li is a magnanimous person and won't make a fuss about it." Li Mu glanced at Qing Xuanzi. This old man was smooth and cunning in dealing with things. He covered up everything with one sentence. If he didn't let this matter go, it would seem that he was narrow-minded. However, Qing Xuanzi obviously didn't give Hua Yangzi any face. He didn't even look at him. He quietly put away his flying sword and flew straight to the celestial mountain above. Hua Yangzi looked embarrassed and said to Li Mu, "I'm sorry, Martial Uncle Li. These young disciples offended you. I apologize to you." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "This has nothing to do with you. You don't have to apologize." Judging from Qing Xuanzi's attitude towards Hua Yangzi, Xuanzong and Fulu School undoubtedly had a completely different sect culture. Fulu school attached great importance to seniority. Therefore, even if Xian Jizi and Yuzenzi's cultivation had reached the transcendent realm, they still had to respectfully call Fu Daozi martial uncle when they saw him. Similarly, no matter how talented and strong the fourth-generation disciples were, they wouldn't be too presumptuous in front of the seniors of the sect whose cultivation was lower than theirs. Xuanzong obviously valued strength more. Although Qing Xuanzi's cultivation wasn't as good as Huayangzi's, he was also in the fifth realm. Moreover, he was extremely young and had unlimited potential in the future. When facing the seniors of the sect, he also had arrogance in his bones. It couldn't be said which sect culture was better. Fulu school respected the teachers more. However, Xuanzong respected strength, and the disciples had a stronger motivation to cultivate. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why Xuanzong had so many powerhouses. After apologizing to Li Mu, Huayangzi quickly left. In the marketplace, many gazes were focused on Li Mu, and the sounds of discussion were endless. Even elder Huayangzi calls him martial uncle. He must be one of the second-generation disciples of the 5 sections. No wonder he's so wealthy and has a dragon as his mount. Qing Xuanzi really can't compare to such a status. At first, I thought that Qing Xuanzi was a refined disciple of a large sect. Now, it seems that this person is narrow-minded and irritable. What kind of treasure did that senior obtain just now? The discussions reached Li Mu's ears. Obviously, he couldn't stay there any longer. Li Mu prepared to go to the Fulu school shop, but before he went, he stopped in front of a small stall. This stall was where Qing Xuanzi had snatched the spirit herbs, and Li Mu had obtained the spirit bone. He reached out and threw a jade bottle to the stall owner, saying, "Refine it well. It's enough for you to break through to the transcendent realm." The stall owner was stunned for a moment. He opened the bottle and immediately smelled a refreshing pill fragrance. With just a whiff, his stagnant cultivation seemed to have loosened. He immediately put away the jade bottle and excitedly bowed to Li Mu. "Thank you, senior." Li Mu waved his hand and left with Wan, Xiao Bai, and the other 2. The stall owner held the jade bottle tightly in his hand, his eyes full of gratitude. It was easy to find a Fulu school shop here. The shops of the other small sects and clans only had 1 floor at most, but the 5 sects each occupied a large 3-story building. As for the Xuanzong school, their shop was at the center of the place. It was the most prosperous location, and it was 5 stories high. In front of the Fulu pavilion, cultivators lined up in an orderly manner. Fulu school's products had always been in short supply in the cultivation world. Li Mu walked in with the 3 girls. A cultivator frowned and said, "Why are they cutting the line?" A Fulu school disciple looked up and immediately came forward, saying respectfully, "Greetings, Uncle Master." Inside the shop, several Fulu school disciples also quickly came forward and greeted respectfully. "Greetings, Uncle Master. Greetings, Uncle Master." Seeing this, the people lining up outside the shop immediately stopped talking. However, they couldn't help but be curious. This young man actually had such a high seniority in the Fulu school. Li Mu waved his hand to the disciples and said, "Go about your business. I'm just here to take a look." An elder led Li Mu and the others to the 3rd floor. After offering them some fragrant tea, he respectfully retreated. Li Mu let Wan and Xiao Bai rest here. He grabbed Cheng Xian's hand, and with a thought, the 2 of them appeared in the Demon Emperor's cave. A thin book with strange runes written on it floated in front of him. There was a page in the book. It was different from the other pages. It exuded a strange aura. It was of the same origin as all the pages of the heavenly tomes that Li Mu had seen before. He reached out his hand, and the page automatically flew out and floated in his palm. Cheng Xian picked up the book and flipped through it. She said in shock, "This really is the Dragon King's relic." The Dragon Clan's language was widely acknowledged to be difficult to learn. They often used a single character to contain a huge amount of information. Sometimes, they used many characters to express a simple meaning. Li Mu didn't understand the Dragon Clan's language. He asked Cheng Xian, "Who is the Dragon King?" Cheng Xian said, 8,000 years ago, He was a supreme master of the Dragon Clan. He once united the Dragon Clan of the Four Seas. He was the recognized king of the Dragon Clan. 8,000 years ago, a master of the Dragon Clan. Without a doubt, the Dragon King that Chung Xian mentioned was one of the supreme masters that stood at the peak of the continent. Li Mu became curious about the relic he left behind. He asked Chung Xian, "What's written on it?" Chung Xian looked at the content on the page, and her face gradually turned red. Li Mu was speechless. "Why are you blushing? Hurry up and read it." "What does this line mean?" Chung Xian lowered her head and whispered, "The taste of the Snake Clan's women is not bad. Their long legs are too clingy." She also said that she would call her sister over tomorrow. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow," Li Mu cursed in his mind. This can't be the dragon's diary, right? He didn't hear the secret information he wanted to hear. Li Mu continued to point to the next page. "What does this line mean?" Chung Xian's face turned even redder. "The Fox Clan is really amazing in bed. It's a pity that her brother is a nine-tailed celestial fox. It's not worth it to fight with him. I won't look for her in the future. The book said that dragons were lustful by nature." Sure enough, this old perverted dragon actually wrote a book about love. But whether he should say it or not, the Snake Clan's legs were really clingy, and the Fox Clan was really amazing in bed. Li Mu coughed lightly and pulled his thoughts back to reality. What's next? Chung Xian continued to read with a red face. "I tricked a Xian ghost these past few days. She said that her physical body had already developed intelligence. I don't know if the two of them together—" Stop. You don't have to read anymore." No matter how thick-skinned Li Mu was, he couldn't force a pure little female dragon to read such indecent things to him. That was too sinful. He looked at Chung Xian and directly asked, "Apart from these things, is there anything else that's useful?" Chung Xian continued to flip through the pages. Only when she flipped to the last page did she say, "Lord Dragon King said that he discovered a great secret hidden in the Dragon Clan's heavenly book." Li Mu continued to ask, "And then?" Chung Xian shook her head. "And then there's nothing else." This broken chapter dragon made Li Mu's heart itch. However, he didn't say anything. Li Mu could see for himself. The page in his hand should be the Dragon Clan's heavenly book. However, for some reason, the Dragon King didn't pass it down. Instead, he hid it in this dating diary. Li Mu scanned this heavenly book with his spiritual sense. However, this time, he didn't enter that strange world like he usually did. A strong rebound force came from the page. Li Mu grunted and took a few steps back. He swallowed a mouthful of blood that came back up. He was slightly injured just by trying to comprehend this page. This page of the heavenly book was obviously sealed by someone. As one of the most ancient races, the Dragon Clan had many strange and unpredictable supernatural powers. Li Mu thought for a while and handed the page to Chung Xian. "Try to touch this page with your spiritual sense." Chung Xian closed her eyes and opened them quickly. She shook her head and said, "My spiritual sense can't enter." It was the same heavenly book. Li Mu was hit by a rebound force when he tried to comprehend it. Although Chung Xian didn't comprehend anything, she wasn't injured either. Perhaps it had something to do with her identity as a dragon. However, why couldn't she comprehend this page, even with her identity as a dragon? Why did the Dragon Clan from 8,000 years ago cut off the Dragon Clan's inheritance? Li Mu couldn't speculate about this point. He could only put away this heavenly book first. No matter what, he had made a big profit this time. The heavenly book was a priceless treasure. Not to mention 5,000 spiritual jades. Even 5 million spiritual jades or 50 million spiritual jades couldn't buy it. It was just that Chung Xian acted too hastily just now. She might have attracted the attention of some people with ulterior motives. Li Mu looked at her and reminded her, "Next time you encounter such things, you must keep a low profile and make a fortune secretly. The fewer people who notice, the better." Chung Xian nodded and said, "I know." Li Mu took the book from her hand and said casually, "All right, teach me the dragon language when you have time." Chung Xian looked at the book in his hand and gave him a meaningful look. Li Mu immediately explained, "Don't think too much. I'm not interested in the romantic history of your Dragon King. I just want to learn something new." We humans have an old saying, there's no end to learning. Once I learn the dragon language, I'll be able to discover this kind of treasure the next time I encounter it. Chapter 532. After leaving the Fey Emperor's cave, Li Mu took stock of his gains. Although he had lost a lot of spirit jades, his gains were also huge. Not to mention the heavenly book. Even if Li Mu couldn't comprehend it, it would still be a priceless treasure. As for the Mahist's successor, it was an even bigger surprise. Even when the 100 schools of thought were flourishing, the Mahist was not unknown. Although the cultivation of the Mahist members was not high, their mechanical techniques were too powerful. Even the top forces of that time had to avoid them. Unfortunately, mechanical techniques required large amounts of precious materials and spirit jades. Not to mention small forces, even ordinary countries could not afford them. Over time, the Mahist disappeared in the long river of history. Great Zhou was strong, and with the Mahist, it was like adding wings to a tiger. Li Mu was looking forward to what surprises this person would bring him. In addition, the clothes and accessories that he spent a large amount of spiritual jades on might not be worth it to others, but Li Mu bought them purely because he wanted the women around him to look good in them. He also felt that they were pleasing to the eye, so the spiritual jades he spent were not in vain. Of course, although it was not in vain, he still felt heartache. The spirit jades he had, other than his own meager salary, the Empress's reward, and the Phantom Princess's forced gift to him, were all used up. He couldn't just ask them for more. Li Mu also had a man's dignity. If they took the initiative to give it to him, then so be it. If they didn't give it to him, then Li Mu wouldn't take the initiative to ask for it. As a man, earning his own money gave him a sense of security. Leaving the 3 girls to rest on the 3rd floor, Li Mu walked down the stairs alone. Fulu Pavilion had a total of 3 floors. The 3rd floor was not open to the public. The 1st floor was for goods, and the 2nd floor was used to entertain important customers. Although there were many Fulu on the 1st floor, it couldn't satisfy everyone's needs. Some customers would ask for custom-made Fulu for special purposes. Of course, the price would be more expensive. When Li Mu walked to the 2nd floor, a Fulu school elder was receiving a middle-aged man in luxurious clothes. The middle-aged man was wearing a long robe that concealed his aura. The robe was filled with spiritual qi, and it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. Judging from his style, it should be a product of a North sect. In a world of cultivators, those who were able to afford the ritual implements of a northern clan were generally people with a certain amount of wealth. The middle-aged man gazed at the elder of the Talisman Amulet sect and said, "To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist Qing Jingzi, I came here this time for the sake of requesting a creation talisman for my son. I only have this one son, and I hope that this talisman can protect him. Creation talisman, heaven rank Fulu. This talisman did not possess any offensive capabilities, but could regenerate severed limbs and regenerate severed heads. Even if one's heart was crushed, it would regenerate in an extremely short period of time. Having a creation talisman was equivalent to having an extra life. Currently, in the world of cultivators, only the Fulu school was known to be able to draw a creation talisman. Qing Jingzi revealed a difficult expression. He looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Fellow Taoist Shun, you also know that the creation talisman is a heaven-rank Fulu. Even in my Fulu school, only the headmaster and a few heads can draw a heaven-rank Fulu. Moreover, the failure rate of a heaven-rank Fulu is extremely high. Even the headmaster cannot guarantee that he will succeed." The middle-aged man said, "I'm very clear about this point, or else I would not have come here. I have inquired about the rules of your school. We will prepare 10 portions of talisman liquid for the creation talisman, and we will also give you 100,000 spiritual jades as a reward." Qing Jingzi nodded and said, "There is something I have to say in advance. If the creation of the talisman fails, all the talisman liquid will be wasted. Out of the 100,000 spiritual jades, we can only return you 50,000. Although the middle-aged man felt the pinch, he also knew that in the world, only the Fulu school could draw a heaven-rank Fulu. Hearing this, he nodded and said, "I understand the rules of your school. I have already prepared the talisman liquid and spiritual jades. Qing Jingzi was about to put away the spiritual jades when he heard a voice. Qing Jingzi, come here. Qing Jingzi looked back and immediately stood up. He jogged to Li Mu and said respectfully, Uncle Master, what are your orders? Li Mu brought him to the third floor and asked bluntly, Is this how you treat your customers? Qing Jingzi was confused. Uncle Master, what's wrong? Li Mu said, For a creation talisman, you want 10 portions of talisman liquid and 100,000 spiritual jades, and there is no guarantee of success. Do you think the reputation of the Fu Lu school is not collapsing fast enough? Although Li Mu was not a businessman, he knew that this was not how business was done. Taking 10 times the materials and a high deposit, and there was no guarantee of success. Even the blackest workshop was not so black-hearted. If the talisman failed this time, who would come to the Fu Lu school to draw talismans next time? Wasn't this chasing the customers away? This person was so generous. If he could spend 100,000 spiritual jades this time, he might spend 200,000 spiritual jades next time. This kind of high-quality customer naturally had to be kept. Xian Jizi, the headmaster, was already useless enough. His own grand elder's lifespan was nearing its end, and the entire school could not even gather the materials for a single heavenly secret talisman. Li Mu even had to ask for help from the Empress and Huanji. If the ancestral court of Fu Lu school was rich enough, why would Li Mu put down his dignity to live off a woman? Qing Jingzi did not feel anything at all. He muttered, But the rules of the school have always been like this. Li Mu did not say much to Qing Jingzi. He directly took out a sound transmission artifact and contacted Xian Jizi. Very quickly, Xian Jizi's voice sounded from the artifact. Junior brother, have you arrived at Xuanzong? Li Mu went straight to the point. I'm currently at Fu Lu Pavilion in Xuanzong. I have something to ask senior brother. Li Mu told Xian Jizi the situation. On the other side of the artifact, Xian Jizi said helplessly, Junior brother, you've misunderstood. It's not that we're deliberately making things difficult for customers. It's just that writing a heavenly secret Fu Lu is often 1 in 10. We can't guarantee success. Of course, if Junior brother personally does it, it's fine even if you only take one set of materials from them. Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, If I draw it, who will the spiritual jades go to? Xian Jizi said, According to the rules, 20% will be handed over to the sect. As for the rest, Junior brother, you can handle it yourself. Li Mu decisively put away the sound transmission artifact and said to Qing Jingzi, From now on, if anyone wants to draw a high-level Fu Lu, tell them to come directly to me. After saying that, he looked at the middle-aged man on the second floor and asked, Who's that person? He's so generous, Qing Jingzi said. He comes from a cultivation family in Jing country. His family has a spiritual jade mine. No wonder he was so generous. So his family had a mine. Li Mu looked at the middle-aged man as if he was looking at a pile of spiritual jades. He walked to the middle-aged man's side. Qing Jingzi took the initiative to introduce him. Fellow Taoist Shun, allow me to introduce you. This is Martial Uncle Ling Jizi. The middle-aged man immediately stood up and cupped his hands. Greetings, Senior Ling Jizi. Although the person in front of him looked young in the cultivation world, one could never estimate one's age based on appearance. Perhaps this person was already an old monster of unknown age. Li Mu smiled kindly and said, Fellow Taoist Shun, there's no need to be so formal. Sit. After the middle-aged man sat down, Li Mu asked directly, Fellow Taoist, do you want a creation talisman? The middle-aged man said, Yes. I'll leave this matter to your school. Li Mu waved his hand and said, There's no rush. Let's talk about the price first. The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment and muttered, Didn't we already talk about the price? He complained in his heart. The price he agreed to just now was already the limit he could accept. If the Fu Lu school increased the price, he would have to seriously consider whether to buy or not. Li Mu smiled and said, It's like this. Although the success rate of creating a creation talisman is not high, the grand elders of my school have returned to the sect recently. If they personally do it, They won't need 10 sets of materials. 5 sets will be enough. In addition, the Fulu school has been entrusted by you to create the talisman. If the talisman fails, it will be the responsibility of the Fulu school. The 100,000 spiritual jades will be returned to you. The middle-aged man sat in his chair, wondering if he had heard wrong. Why did the Fulu school's price get lower and lower? Not only were the materials reduced by half, but if the talisman failed, the 100,000 spiritual jades would be returned. How could there be such a good deal? Limu looked at him and explained, "Our Fulu school is a famous sect. We won't take advantage of you. Since the success rate of creating talismans has increased, we naturally won't charge you so much talisman liquid and spiritual jades." The middle-aged man came back to his senses and immediately said, Okay. We'll do as Senior says." Limu thought for a moment and said, "I don't know if this fellow Taoist has any friends who need a creation talisman. After successfully creating the first Fulu, the success rate of creating the second one will increase. Therefore, we could buy the second Fulu at half price. In other words, for 150,000 spiritual jades, you can buy 2 creation talismans." Although the middle-aged man didn't need it himself, if someone could buy another one, he would save 25,000 spiritual jades. Thinking of this, he no longer hesitated and took out his sound transmission Immortal tool. He immediately said, "Old Ma, where are you? I have a good thing here. Quickly come to the Fulu Pavilion." In the Fulu Pavilion, 2 aristocratic family heads who had traveled thousands of miles from Jing country to Xuanzong happily gathered 10 portions of spirit liquid and 150,000 spiritual jades. They planned to buy a creation talisman each and give it to their family's younger generation to protect themselves. The Fulu school was indeed a Fulu school. They had visited all the shops here, and only the Fulu school could accept the business of the heaven-grade Fulu. Limu personally sent the 2 big clients out and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, take care. In the future, let's work together more often. Our sect accepts all kinds of Fulu, and we'll give you preferential treatment. The price is negotiable." At the staircase on the 2nd floor, Qing Jingzi revealed a smile and muttered, 150,000 spiritual jades. If we give Xuanzong 45,000 spiritual jades, we'll make a net profit of 105,000. Limu sensed that something was wrong and asked with a frown, "Why do we have to give Xuanzong 45,000 spiritual jades?" Qing Jingzi said, "Martial uncle, don't you know? All the transactions that our 5 sects conduct here have to be given 30% to Xuanzong. This is also because the 6 sects are from the same sect, so Xuanzong gives us preferential treatment. The other small sects, aristocratic family shops, and stalls outside have to give Xuanzong 40% or even 50%. Limu was stunned for a moment before he strode out of the shop and said to the 2 figures who were about to disappear, "Fellow Taoists, please wait." Chapter 533. In Fulu Pavilion, the 2 family heads returned to the shop and looked nervously at the spiritual jades returned by Limu. They asked, "Senior, if you think the price is too low, we could discuss it again." Limu returned the spiritual jades to them and said, "This is a new rule of our Fulu school. For valuable Fulu items of the heaven realm and above, after the writing is done, you must hand over the spiritual jades and talismans. This way, in a month, you can come to Great Zhou's Shindu to pick up the talismans." Hearing this, the 2 felt relieved and accepted the spiritual jades. They smiled and said, "That's good. We originally planned to go to Great Zhou's Shindu to take a look, so it's on the way." As they walked out of Fulu Pavilion, the 2 sighed in their hearts. Although they were both leaders of Tao, Xuanzong and Fulu school's attitude towards small and medium-sized sects and families was completely different. Xuanzong was high and mighty. Their shop was open here, and every time they sold a product, they had to give 40% of the income to Xuanzong. Compared to Xuanzong, Fulu school treated them especially well, living up to its name as the leader of Tao. After sending the 2 off again, Limu finally understood how Xuanzong's magnificent mountain gate and the spiritual jade plaza outside were built. Including the other 5 sects of Tao, the large and small sects of Zhou province, the cultivation families, and countless rogue cultivators were all contributing to Xuanzong's construction. While most of the countries in Zhou province were still in a feudal society, Xuanzong had already taken a step into capitalism. He was the one who wasted his breath, and the one who was tired of writing talismans. In the end, he was actually working for Xuanzong. Li Mu felt a nameless anger rise in his heart. He angrily asked, "Does our Fulu school not have a mountain gate of our own? Why do we have to do business in someone else's place?" Qing Jingzi said, "This is Sect Master's idea. He said that White Cloud Mountain is a sacred land of the Tao sect and shouldn't do such unscrupulous things." Li Mu waved his sleeves and snapped, "Don't mention him to me. Xianjizi, that prodigal son of a bitch. How many spiritual jades has he earned for others over the years? Yet he can't even gather the materials for the heavenly secret talisman. How does he still have the face to be the sect leader?" Qing Jingzi silently lowered his head. He couldn't interrupt when his uncle master was scolding the sect master, and he didn't dare to interrupt. Li Mu scolded Xianjizi and calmed down very quickly. It was understandable that Xuanzong would provide the platform and take a cut from the transaction. However, they were too black-hearted. 50,000 spirit jades were gone for no reason. Li Mu's heart was bleeding. He was both angry and distressed. When he walked to the first floor and saw the situation inside, he was even angrier. Although there were many customers lining up outside, there weren't many Fulu school disciples in charge of serving customers. There weren't enough people in the shop to begin with. The few disciples who were acting as temporary clerks were still gathered together and chatting happily. They ignored the customers and ignored them. A few customers came in and walked around. When they realized that there was no one to serve them, they turned around and went to other shops. Other than Fulu school, there were also people who were good at Fulu from various sects, as well as some mid-level cultivation clans. The mid-level and low-level Fulu they produced were also of good quality. People who wanted to buy Fulu might not only choose Fulu school. Most of these disciples usually cultivated in their sections. How would they know the ways of commercial service? It was unknown how many customers went to other shops because of their arrogant and rude attitude. Li Mu inadvertently glanced around and saw a familiar figure in the shop on the first floor. It was the stall owner who Li Mu had bought a large amount of clothes and accessories from. He was currently bargaining with a disciple in the shop. He looked at a Fulu and pestered the disciple, saying, "Give me a discount. 1,000 spirit jades is really too expensive. How about I buy 2 pieces and you give me a 20% discount?" The Fulu school disciple was unmoved. He said indifferently, "The Fulu's price is set by the elders. We don't accept any bargaining. If you want to buy, then buy. If you don't want to buy, then go elsewhere. There are plenty of Fulu on this street." The young man looked at the Fulu floating on the counter and hesitated for a long time. In the end, he decided to give up. Just as he was about to walk out of the shop, a voice came from behind him. "Wait." The young man turned around and saw the young man who had thrown out 20,000 spirit jades standing behind him. After being stunned for a moment, his expression suddenly changed. He said, "Don't tell me you're going back on your word. Once a product is sold, it can't be returned unless there's a problem with the quality." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to ask for a refund. Come with me." With that, he turned around and went up to the second floor. The young man hesitated for a moment, but could only follow. When they reached the second floor, Li Mu sat down and said to the young man, "Sit." The young man immediately shook his head and said, "Senior, if you have something to say, I'll just stand and listen." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "What's your name?" The young man honestly replied, "I'm Ma Feng." Ma as in handsome horse, Feng as in wind. Although this person's cultivation wasn't high, he had a good business mind, especially his mouth. It was simply like a lotus flower. If the disciples of the Fulu school were half as good as him, the Fulu in the shop would have been sold out long ago. Li Mu poured himself a cup of tea and said indifferently, "Ma Feng, that's a good name. Who is your master, and which sect are you from?" Ma Feng still didn't know why this expert from the Fulu school was looking for him. He didn't dare to hide anything and continued, "Senior, I don't have a master, nor do I belong to any sect. The reason I embarked on the path of cultivation was because I found an introductory book on chi cultivation at an old bookstall when I was young. I pondered on it blindly and unintentionally walked on this path. Limu looked at him and suddenly asked, "Are you willing to enter my Fulu school?" Ma Feng was stunned. As a rogue cultivator, he had no sect, no background, and no one to guide him in cultivation. His biggest dream was to enter a sect, but his aptitude wasn't good. Even small sects weren't willing to accept him. Entering one of the 6 Taoist sects was something he didn't even dare to dream of. After coming back to his senses, he immediately knelt down and said loudly, "This disciple is willing." Limu nodded and said, "Very good. From now on, you're a disciple of the 4th generation of the Fulu school." Ma Feng immediately took off a bag from his back and placed it in front of Limu. He said, "These are the spiritual jades that Marshall Granduncle used to buy the Immortal clothes and accessories. This disciple will return them to you." He had seen what happened in the market and guessed Limu's identity. He immediately changed the way he addressed him. Limu waved his hand and said, "These belong to you. Keep them for yourself." Ma Feng put the bag back on his back and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marshall Granduncle." Limu said, "Get up and talk. I have some things to ask you." Ma Feng stood up from the ground and said, "Please ask, Marshall Granduncle. This disciple will tell you everything he knows." Limu said, "If you were to manage the Fulu Pavilion, what would you do?" Ma Feng was stunned again. "Let me manage the Fulu Pavilion?" Limu nodded and said, "You can speak your mind boldly." Ma Feng had a thoughtful look on his face. He was not talented, short, and ugly. Even those small sects didn't accept him. There must be a reason why this senior was willing to let him join one of the 6 Taoist sections. This was his chance. If he grasped it, his future cultivation path would be smooth. If he didn't, he might just be an insignificant rogue cultivator for the rest of his life. He took a deep breath and said, "Marshall Granduncle, this disciple thinks that there is a big problem with the Fulu Pavilion now." Limu gestured to him with his hand and said, "Sit down and talk slowly." Ma Feng sat down and said boldly, "First, in the Fulu Pavilion, the attitude of the senior brothers towards the customers is too bad. We're not the only shop that sells Fulu here. Since we are the sellers, we have to prioritize the customers. Many customers are not treated in time after entering the shop, so they will go to other shops. In the middle and low-grade Fulu, the quality of our Fulu is not better than the other shops, but the price is too high and there is not much competition. This has caused a large loss of customers." Ma Feng observed Limu's expression as he spoke. Seeing that he was not angry because of these words, he continued to speak boldly. "Second, the selling method in the shop is too rigid. 1 Fulu is 100 spirit jades. 2 Fulu is 200 spirit jades. 10 Fulu is 1,000 spirit jades. There is no discount at all, so it is difficult to stimulate the customer's desire to buy. We should set up a variety of selling methods. For example, in the shop, if you spend 500 spirit jades, 50 spirit jades, 1,000 spirit jades, 150 spirit jades. If you buy 2 Earth-grade Fulu, you'll get 1 Earth-grade Fulu for free." Limu nodded and said, "Well said, continue." Although he understood these things with his identity, it was not suitable for him to get involved in these trivial matters. He needed a capable assistant, and the young man in front of him was obviously the best candidate. His appearance was not impressive, but he was extremely business-minded. After receiving Limu's affirmation, Ma Feng became bolder and said, "The exchange in Xuanzong is only held once every 5 years, and it takes a large amount of our spirit jades. Why don't we set up shops in the sect, or even in the various prefectures of the Great Zhou, or in the various countries of the Zhou province? With the reputation of our Fulu school, business will definitely be 10 or 100 times better than it is now. At this exchange, loose cultivators and cultivation clans from all over the world will gather here. This is a great opportunity for us. We must let the Fulu Pavilion leave a good impression in their hearts." As Ma Feng spoke, he was no longer limited to the Fulu Pavilion, but looked at the entire Zhou province. He planned a path of continuous development for the Fulu school. 2 hours later, he was still talking nonstop. Xuanzong's location is not good. They are located in the easternmost part of the Zhu province. Many cultivators have to travel thousands of li to get here, and the divine capital of the Great Zhou is in the center of the Zhu province. If we can build a market like this in the divine capital of the Great Zhou and invite the various sects and cultivation clans to move in, we will only take 10% of the spirit jades. This will definitely attract everyone. Unfortunately, this will offend Xuanzong, and the Great Zhou court may not agree. Although Li Mu also wanted to do this, and this would bring in a large amount of tax for the court, there was no doubt that this would cause Xuanzong to have no business at all. Offending the number one sect of Taoism, the strongest power in the Zhu province, was clearly not a good choice at the moment. We'll talk about this later. Li Mu stood up and gently patted Ma Feng's shoulder. From now on, I'll leave the Fulu Pavilion to you. Chapter 534. Fulu Pavilion. Li Mu brought Ma Feng in front of Qing Jingzi and said, "This is Ma Feng, a new fourth-generation disciple." Ma Feng hurriedly bowed to Qing Jingzi and said, "Greetings, martial uncle. Now is not the time for the sect to recruit disciples, but the head martial uncle and martial uncle all had special privileges." Qing Jingzi was just surprised. This person's appearance was ordinary and could even be called ugly. His cultivation was pitifully low. Why did martial uncle make an exception and let him in? Thinking back to when he entered the sect, he had passed many trials and eliminated many opponents before successfully becoming a disciple of Fu Lu school. Li Mu continued to say to Qing Jingzi, "From now on, Ma Feng is the shopkeeper of Fu Lu Pavilion. You will assist him in managing Fu Lu Pavilion. The two of you will discuss the matters of the pavilion. If there is anything you cannot decide, then come find me." Qing Jingzi's face was filled with shock. He could not believe his ears. A new fourth-generation disciple had instantly replaced his position to become the manager of the Talisman Pavilion, and this caused him to be unable to accept it for a moment. But he couldn't disobey the orders of his martial uncle, so even if he was displeased in his heart, he could only nod and say, "Yes, martial uncle." Ma Feng took a deep breath and puffed out his chest. He said solemnly to Li Mu, "Disciple will do his best to not disappoint martial uncle." Qing Jingzi looked at Ma Feng with an unperturbed gaze. He wanted to see what ability this person had to be valued so highly by martial uncle. Even if he was dissatisfied, he still followed Li Mu's orders and cooperated with this person's actions. Ma Feng first found over 10 young and beautiful female cultivators in the market, and he used them to replace the few Talisman sect disciples in the pavilion before receiving the guests that came to the Talisman Pavilion. Moreover, he promised them that he would pay them 10 spirit jades every day, and they would receive a commission of 1 spirit jade for every 100 spirit jades they sold. He called these female cultivators to the second floor and spent an entire 2 hours teaching them how to attract customers and how to promote the goods in the pavilion. He also made a decision on his own. If a customer bought 2 Earth Rank Fulu tickets, they would get a Mystic Rank Fulu ticket. If a customer spent 500 Fulu tickets, they would get a discount of 50 Fulu tickets. If a customer spent 1,000 Fulu tickets, they would get a discount of 150 Fulu tickets. Qing Jingzi wanted to stop Ma Feng several times, but seeing that Li Mu did not say anything, he forcefully suppressed this thought. He and the Fu Lu school disciple who had been replaced stood to the side and watched coldly. When this person's various mischievous actions ruined the Fu Lu Pavilion's business, martial uncle knew exactly what this person was capable of. Xuanzong's Taoist Exchange Conference, or Trade Conference, was held every 5 years and lasted for a month. It was a grand event in the cultivation world of the Zhu continent. During the conference, cultivators from all over the Zhu continent would travel thousands of miles to Xuanzong in the East Sea. Most of them were here to exchange for suitable cultivation resources. In the market, several men were walking together. One of them said, "Which one of you will come with me to the Fu Lu Pavilion? I want to buy some offensive Fu Lu tickets for self-defense." Someone beside him said, "If you want to buy low-rank Fu Lu tickets, don't go to the Fu Lu Pavilion. It's the same in other shops. The man asked in confusion, why? Shouldn't the Fulu schools' Fulu tickets be the best? The man said, low-rank Fulu tickets are not difficult. If Fulu school can draw them, other small sects and families could draw them too. There is no difference in effectiveness. Fulu school's tickets are more expensive. Moreover, the Fulu pavilion's disciples are all arrogant. They don't even look us in the eye. If we enter the shop, no one will pay attention to us. After this person spoke, he immediately received the agreement of the people beside him. Brother Sue is right. 5 years ago, I went to the Fulu pavilion once. The disciples of these large sects are indeed very arrogant. I know of a small sect that also specializes in Fulu tickets. Their prices are much lower than the Fulu schools. Last time I bought one from them. In these 5 years, those Fulu tickets have allowed me to escape death several times. I strongly recommend you go to that shop. All right then. If I can save some spirit jades, I also want to buy a magic tool. Just as the group was about to walk past the Fulu pavilion, 2 beautiful female cultivators suddenly came up to them. They smiled and said, fellow Taoists, what do you want to buy? Our Fulu pavilion has an event today. If you spend 500 spirit jades in the pavilion, you can return 50 spirit jades. If you spend 1,000 spirit jades, you can return 150 spirit jades. The smiles on the faces of the 2 female cultivators were extremely gentle and beautiful. The business of the Fulu pavilion was closely related to their remuneration. The more customers they received, the more spirit jades they would receive. If rogue cultivators wanted to earn spirit jades to cultivate, they would have to risk their lives every time. How could it be as simple as this? In order to attract customers, they used almost all of their skills. The male cultivators originally didn't plan to come to the Fulu pavilion, but they couldn't resist the enthusiasm of the 2 beautiful female cultivators and entered the shop with some reluctance. The situation inside the Fulu pavilion was completely different from the last time they came. There are no longer stiff faces of the disciples of the Fulu school. Instead, there were beautiful female cultivators with sweet smiles. The 2 female cultivators first brought them to a resting area with tables and chairs. They poured tea for them and then asked with a smile, fellow Taoists, what kind of Fulu do you need? Do you need me to introduce it to you? Sitting on comfortable soft stools and tasting fragrant tea, the male cultivators felt embarrassed even if they wanted to leave. One of the male cultivators' throat moved, and he said, I need some profound, rank, offensive Fulu. One of the female cultivators smiled and said, profound, rank, offensive Fulu. I recommend the Guiding Lightning Talisman, Fire Snake Talisman, and Icicle Talisman. The Guiding Lightning Talisman has a sale today. Buy one and get one free. The Fire Snake Talisman and Icicle Talisman can participate in the full discount. The man's companion tugged at his sleeve and said, buy one Lightning Talisman and get one free. This is much more cost-effective in other shops. I've used this talisman to kill several enemies. You'd better buy more, the male cultivator immediately said. Then I want 5 Guiding Lightning Talismans. The female cultivator smiled and said, do you also need other Fulu? For example, the Divine Travel Talisman or something like that. The male cultivator shook his head and said, no need. I don't travel often. I don't need the Divine Travel Talisman. The beautiful female cultivator said that the Divine Travel Talisman is not only useful for traveling. When you encounter a strong enemy, this talisman can also save your life, especially the high-rank Divine Travel Talisman. It can make enemies 2 realms higher than you unable to catch up. The male cultivator thought carefully and seemed to be convinced. He nodded and said, then give me 2 of the profound rank Divine Travel Talisman. They sat there and tasted tea. Soon, the female cultivator brought them the Fulu they needed. The male cultivator paid the spiritual jades and put away the Fulu. He said to the people around him, do you guys want to buy any Fulu? One of the male cultivators shook his head and said, I want to buy a magic treasure. We'll go to the North Sect's tool refining pavilion later. The female cultivator's expression changed when she heard this. She said unhurriedly, fellow Taoist, our Fulu pavilion also sells magic treasures. Do you want to take a look? Although the Fu school specialized in Fu, there were also elders in the school who knew how to refine tools and elixirs. In the entire Fu pavilion, Fu accounted for 70% of the goods, while elixirs and magic treasures accounted for 30%. The male cultivator said politely, "No need." The female cultivator did not give up. She smiled at him and said, "To be honest, if you want to buy Earth rank and Heaven rank magic treasures, I certainly recommend you to go to the North Sect. After all, the North Sect is a great tool refining sect. The quality of their high-rank magic treasures is unmatched by any other sect. However, if you want to buy low-rank magic treasures, our Fu Pavilion is not inferior to the North Sect. Moreover, the price is half. If you buy one magic treasure in the North Sect, you can buy two here." The male cultivator thought carefully, and his expression changed. He did not go to buy Earth rank and Heaven rank magic treasures. He could not afford those magic treasures even if he sold himself. Just as they thought, in terms of low-rank Fu, some small sects' Fu quality was not inferior to the Fu school. As for low-rank magic treasures, the Fu school would not be inferior to the North Sect. If it was not for the fact that magic treasures had to be produced by the North Sect, then it was not bad to use the Fu schools. Moreover, the price was much lower than the North Sect's, which made him very tempted. Originally, he could only buy one offensive Dharma artifact. Now, he could buy another defensive Dharma artifact. This was an irresistible temptation. He quickly made a decision in his heart. He immediately stood up and said, "Please take me to see the Dharma artifact at the staircase on the second floor." Qing Jingzi and the other Fu school disciples looked at the bustling scene on the first floor. Their faces were filled with shame. In just 2 hours, the shop's turnover had exceeded theirs in a day. Qing Jingzi finally understood why his uncle master wanted to use this person to replace him. He was sincerely convinced and bowed to Li Mu. "Uncle master has a good eye for people. I admire you from the bottom of my heart." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "You guys go down too. See if there's anything you need help with. Don't just stand here." Including Qing Jingzi, all the disciples went down the stairs. In just a few hours, the shop situation changed completely. Li Mu knew that professional matters should be left to professionals. Although Qing Jingzi and the other Fu school disciples were talented and had high cultivation, they were not suitable to sell goods. In terms of business in the cultivation world, the Talisman Charm sect was blessed by the heavens. As one of the 6 sects of Tao, it was a famous brand that had existed for thousands of years. Just its signboard alone was able to attract many customers. If it were to carry out some appropriate marketing methods and bring in some service and sales talents, then the Talisman Pavilion would simply become a large-scale spirit jade machine. Many businesses in the cultivation world were profitable. Not only Fu school, but also Danding sect, the North and South sects, large and small sects, and aristocratic families. The cost of 10 pieces of spirit jade would be sold at least 100 pieces of spirit jade. With a little promotion, buy one get one discount, it would immediately become the conscience of the industry. But the spirit jade would be split with Xuanzong. The better the shop's business, the more Li Mu's heart would ache. But there was no other way. Although Li Mu also wanted to move the shop back to the sect and not give Xuanzong a chance to exploit it, before that, he had to make Fu Pavilion famous. Xuanzong had his eyes on Fu school's spirit jade, while Li Mu had his eyes on their influence. In the current cultivation world, only Xuanzong could gather so many cultivators in one place. Li Mu's purpose on this trip was to help Wanwan untie the knot in her heart. He interfered in Fu Pavilion's business, but he really couldn't stand by and watch. The higher-ups of Fu school all had profound cultivation and looked down on merchants. But they never thought that without spirit jade, how could low-level disciples improve their cultivation? Without talisman liquid and spiritual medicine reserves, the elders of the sect were about to die. They could only watch helplessly. After all, they were also part of Fu school. There were some things that Xian Jizi didn't have to worry about, but Li Mu had to worry about him. Fu Pavilion's business was on the right track for the time being, so Li Mu didn't have to worry too much. He came to Fulu Pavilion's third floor. Wan Wan and Xiao Bai were playing flying chess, and Chung Xian was watching from the side. Li Mu looked at Chung Xian from afar and said, "Chung Xian, come to my room for a moment." Chapter 535. On the third floor of Fulu Pavilion, Xiao Bai and Wan Wan were playing airplane chess. Occasionally, they would turn their heads to look at a room not far away. Chung Xian and Li Mu's in and sound could be heard from the room. Dragon language was really difficult to learn. At first, they were curious and wanted to learn it, but because it was too difficult, they both gave up very quickly. In the room, Li Mu looked at the strange characters that Chung Xian wrote on the paper and made strange sounds. Chung Xian shook her head and corrected him. "That's not how you pronounce it. Repeat after me %." Li Mu imitated %. No, it's %. *yen %. Chung Xian had to correct him many times before Li Mu finally learned this note. He had always thought that he was smart until he began to learn the dragon language. When he first learned the Shangguo language, it was as easy as blowing off dust. However, the dragon language could not be learned in that way. It could only be taught by a dragon hand and mouth. Li Mu also knew many Fey languages, but none of them were as difficult as dragon language. It made him wonder from time to time if dragon language was the language of this world. After learning for a while, he said to Chung Xian, "Your language is too difficult. If you don't have anything to do tonight, you can stay in my room." With their cultivation, it was no problem for them to not sleep for a few days and nights. Li Mu was now very curious about the dragon race. The first thing he needed to do was to learn dragon language. The Xuanzong Exchange Conference would last for a month. Li Mu was not in a hurry to go back, since he had traveled thousands of miles to come here. In the next few days, he and Chung Xian stayed in their room and didn't come out at all. They studied day and night. Fulu Pavilion's business was also booming. Among the 6 sect shops, only Fulu School was willing to lower themselves and truly think for the perspective of their customers. In just a few days, the Talisman Pavilion's reputation had spread throughout the market, and the number of customers was increasing day by day. Some customers were even willing to come here to buy low-level elixirs and magic weapons, instead of choosing the Danding sect and the North sect. Pill Cauldron Pavilion, Weapon Forging Pavilion, Spirit Array Pavilion. The disciples of the various sects clearly discovered that the number of customers in their shops for this exchange meeting was much less than in the past. After some investigation, they discovered that many of the customers had been led away by Fulu Pavilion. However, they didn't care too much about it. Cultivators prioritized cultivation. If it weren't for the sect's request, they wouldn't even bother to come here and waste a month doing business. The other sects didn't care, and Xuanzong naturally didn't care either. The better Fulu School's business was, the more benefits Xuanzong would reap. No matter how the other sects and clans competed for customers, Xuanzong would always be the final winner. A few days later, under Chung Xian's tutelage day and night, Li Mu finally managed to reach a rudimentary understanding of dragon language. Of course, he was still far from being able to understand the Dragon King's diary. Today, there was a lecture by Xuanzong. Li Mu planned to go listen. First, he wanted to go out and get some fresh air. Second, he had received Xuanzong's invitation to participate in the lecture. For this exchange meeting, Li Mu was the only second-generation disciple of Fulu School. He still had to give face to Xuanzong. There weren't many people in Fulu Pavilion today. There weren't even many customers in the market. On the neighboring island, a large training hall was packed with people. Today, Xuanzong's experts will be lecturing here. They would also answer some questions about cultivation. It was possible that one sentence from them could save many people months or even years of cultivation. Even cultivators who came for business purposes wouldn't miss such a grand event. At the front of the training hall, there were several seats. Those seats were reserved for the seniors of the 6 sects of Taoism. Generally speaking, those who could sit there were second-generation disciples of the 6 sects of Taoism, Dongshuan's experts. Except for the young man sitting on the left. A few days ago, he spent a lot of money in the market and severely embarrassed Qing Xuanzi. Later, people began to inquire about his identity. They learned that he was the disciple of Fu Daozi, the supreme elder of Fulu school. Although his cultivation wasn't as high as Dongxian, he was a true second-generation disciple of Fulu school. He was in the same generation as the chief and chief of the six sects. Below these seats, there were about a dozen seats, which belonged to some well-known cultivation clans and mid-level sects in Zhuzhou, as well as some Xuanzong disciples. As for the others, they could only sit cross-legged on the ground and listen. That's Master Shun of Jing Country. The Shun family started with a spiritual jade mine. His family's strength is no weaker than a mid-level sect. I heard that he bought a talisman of creation from Fulu school. A heaven-grade Fulu costs at least 100,000 spiritual jades, and he has to prepare 10 sets of talisman liquid. The Shun family is really rich. The six sects have to be the richest. Fulu school sells a Fulu for 100,000 spiritual jades, and he has to prepare his own materials. This is simply robbing spiritual jades. You can't say that. Who doesn't know that the success rate of a heaven-grade Fulu is extremely low? 10 sets of materials may not be enough to make one. Moreover, I heard that the rules of Fulu Pavilion have changed. The Fulu Pavilion doesn't accept spiritual jades before it's completed. It can be said that the six sects have a conscience. The crowd kept talking. When more than 10 young disciples of Xuanzong flew down from above and landed on their seats, the cultivators sitting cross-legged in the Taoist field were in an uproar. It's Qin Yunzi. He's only in his 30s, but his cultivation has already reached Dongxian. He's Xuanzong. No, he's the first among the fourth-generation disciples of the six sects of Taoism. He's bound to be the next sect master of Xuanzong. Although his cultivation was piled up by Xuanzong with a lot of resources, his talent can't be ignored to be able to push his cultivation to Dongxian in such a short time. Qing Qingzi, Qing Xuangzi, and Xuanzong's young geniuses have all come out. I really envy them. Each of them has amazing talent and has such a powerful sect behind them. Sooner or later, they'll become the strongest in the world. Amidst the discussion, Li Mu's gaze swept across the young disciples. When his gaze swept across a young disciple, he felt a sense of familiarity in his heart. That young disciple called Qing Chengzi gave him a sense of familiarity. However, Li Mu had never been to Xuanzong before, and he didn't know any Xuanzong disciples. He quickly searched through his memory, and soon, this person's figure overlapped with a shadow in Li Mu's memory. A few years ago, when Li Mu was still working in the North County, the wife of the Rat King under the White Demon King was once injured by a human cultivator. The human cultivator who injured the Rat King's wife was the one who killed Xiao Bai's entire family. Xuanzong's Qing Qingzi looked exactly like that person. Not only that, but his aura also reminded Li Mu of the aura that remained in Xiao Bai's grandmother and the Rat King's wife. Just as Li Mu confirmed this person's identity, a fierce shout came from a futon in front of the training hall. "Give me back my grandmother's life." A white figure flew up from the futon. The sword in his hand was already unsheathed, and the tip of the sword was pointed at Qing Qingzi. This sudden change immediately attracted the attention of countless people in front of the training hall. The cultivators in the training ground were extremely shocked. There was actually someone who dared to assassinate a disciple of the Xian sect right in front of the elders of the Xian sect. This kind of suicidal behavior could be considered crazy. Qing Chengzi and the other young disciples didn't expect this to happen. Facing that figure, the others didn't move. They believed that Qing Chengzi could deal with it alone. Qing Chengzi was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he unsheathed the long sword on his back and faced the figure. After a short exchange, he found that the beautiful woman's cultivation was almost the same as his. He was shocked and confused. When did he provoke such a strong cultivator? Facing such an opponent, Qing Chengzi didn't dare to underestimate her. He immediately used several of his most powerful spells. However, facing his spells, the woman only cared about attacking and didn't defend at all. Every time his attacks landed on her body, they would immediately dissipate. After a short exchange, Qing Chengzi had already determined that the woman not only had a good cultivation, but also had a defensive treasure. He wouldn't be able to defeat her in a short time. Just as he was feeling anxious, the old man in the front seat suddenly stood up and snorted. He said loudly, "Who are you? How dare you come to my Xuanzong?" As soon as he finished speaking, a transparent giant hand appeared in the void and grabbed at the woman. Under the pressure of the giant hand, the cultivators with low cultivation suddenly felt like Mount Tai was pressing down on them. They found it difficult to breathe. Even the strong cultivators in the creation realm found it difficult to breathe. They were shocked by the power of Dongxian. Under the pressure of the giant hand, Xiao Bai couldn't move. She could only watch as the hand grabbed at her. In the next moment, a figure that wasn't very big but made her feel at ease stood in front of her. Li Mu floated in the void in front of Xiao Bai. He didn't do anything. The aura in his body swept out, and the giant hand collapsed. After a moment of silence, there was another uproar. "Isn't that the senior from Fulu School? Why is he helping this assassin? Didn't you notice that this female assassin is the beauty who has been following this senior around? What's wrong with Qing Qingzi? He seems to have a death feud with this beauty. This is going to be interesting." The conflict between Fulu School and Xuanzong. As the crowd discussed in low voices, someone suddenly realized something and said in surprise, "The one who attacked just now was Senior Miao Yuanzi from Xuanzong. He has advanced to Dongxian many years ago. This senior from Fulu School is only at the 5th realm, but he blocked Senior Miao Yuanzi's angry attack so easily. It's unbelievable." Only then did the crowd realize this. They all looked at the figure floating in the void with shocked eyes. Among the disciples of Xuanzong, Qing Xuanzi's face was pale. If Elder Miao Yuanzi's palm strike had landed on him, he would have been seriously injured even if he didn't die. However, it was easily resolved by this person. Thinking of the conflict between him and this person, Qing Xuanzi suddenly felt a wave of fear. Li Mu slowly landed and looked back at Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai bit her lower lip and tears welled up in her eyes. She choked and said, "Benefactor." Li Mu held her in his arms with one hand and patted her back. He said softly, "I know. Leave the rest to me." Wan Wan and Chung Xian also left the crowd and quickly stood beside Xiao Bai. Li Mu waved his hand and a golden light shot out. Qing Qingzi suddenly felt his waist tighten, and he couldn't circulate his spiritual power. Then, he was dragged to Li Mu by a huge force. At the front of the training hall, Miao Yuanzi looked at Li Mu with a gloomy face and asked, "What is the meaning of this?" Li Mu shook his wrist, and the bound Qing Chengzi knelt on the ground. He looked at Miao Yuanzi with a gloomy face and said, "You connive with your disciples to bring disaster to the great Zhou and kill my sister's family. Why do you have to ask me?" The two looked at each other, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. Beside Miao Yuanzi, a female cultivator stood up and said, "Senior brother Miao Yuanzi, junior brother Ling Jizi, let's sit down and talk. There may be some misunderstanding. The 6 sects are one family. Let's not hurt each other." The people of the Danding sect stood up. Miao Yuanzi's face didn't soften. Instead, he looked at Li Mu and said, "Junior sister Jade-san, you all saw it. Today, it was Fulu School who provoked you first. It wasn't my Xuanzong that was rude." Jade-san walked in front of Li Mu and said, "Junior brother Ling Jizi, let this disciple go first. If there's anything, we can talk about it slowly. After all, this was Xuanzong, and Li Mu wasn't an unreasonable person." He took back the immortal binding lock. Miao Yuanzi waved his sleeve, rolled up Qing Qingzi, and flew up to the Dao Palace. Li Mu followed with Xiao Bai and Wan Wan. Seeing this, Jade Sun and the elders of the other 4 sects looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly. They also flew up. Even with the Xuanzong elders presiding, the training hall still became chaotic. What's going on? Xuanzong is a righteous sect. How could a disciple of Xuanzong do something like killing people? There must be some kind of misunderstanding. I also think it's a misunderstanding the disciples of Xuanzong who stayed behind also sighed. Qing Songzi shook his head and sighed. I've already advised senior brother Qing Qingzi not to be too eager for quick success, but he just wouldn't listen. He likes to kill demons for their demon cores and souls. Now, they've come knocking on his door. Although Qing Songzi deliberately lowered his voice when talking to his fellow disciples, there were nearly 10,000 people in the training hall, and many of them had high cultivation. It was easy for them to hear what he said. What? Qing Qingzi likes to kill demons? Isn't this forbidden by the big sects? Besides, the Great Zhou court doesn't allow this kind of behavior. Forbidden is forbidden. Killing demons isn't killing people. How could a core disciple like Qing Qingzi be punished by the sect for killing a few demons? So what that senior said is true. So what if it's true? So what if it's false? How can Fulu School's strength compare to Xuanzong? If you were Xuanzong's sect master, would you punish a core disciple for such a small matter and damage the sect's reputation? Hearing the discussion, a Xuanzong female disciple glared at Qing Songzi and said, "Qing Songzi, can you shut your mouth?" Qing Songzi said innocently, "I'm just doing this for senior brother Qing Qingzi's sake. Let's go up and take a look. I don't know how the sect master will punish senior brother Qing Qingzi." Chapter 536. Xuanzong. There were 9 peaks hanging upside down above the EC. In the Taoist palace on the 9th peak, the elders of the 6 Taoist sects had gathered. A middle-aged man dressed in colorful robes looked at Qing Qingzi and asked, "Qing Qingzi, is it like what Marshal Granduncle Ling Jizi said, that you have committed such evil deeds in the North County?" Qing Qingzi stood in the hall and said loudly, "Sect Master, this lady must have mistaken me for someone else. I have never been to the North County, and it is impossible for me to kill her clan. I am innocent." The Xuanzong sect master, Miao Yunzi, waved his wide sleeves and said, "I believe that junior brother Ling Jizi would not speak without thinking. Your words alone are not enough to convince others. Miao Yuan, take him to Discipline Peak. Whether he is lying or not, the Discipline Elder will find out." After saying that, he looked at Li Mu and asked, "Is junior brother Ling Jizi satisfied with this?" At least so far, as the Xuanzong sect master and a 7th realm expert, Miao Yunzi had shown enough sincerity. He did not protect the disciples of the sect, but dealt with them according to the rules of the Xuanzong sect. Li Mu had no objections to this. He held Xiao Bai's hand and gave her a comforting look. After Qing Qingzi was taken away, the atmosphere in the Taoist palace was gloomy. Jade Sun took the initiative to speak and said with a smile, "It has only been a year since we parted in the Demon Nation, but junior brother Ling Jizi's cultivation has already reached the peak of the creation realm. It really makes me feel ashamed. I'm afraid that Fulu School will have another expert soon." Li Mu had a good impression of this senior sister of the Danding sect. He smiled and said, "I just encountered some opportunities." Jade Sun said, "Junior brother, there is no need to be humble. As cultivators, opportunities and talent are indispensable. The so-called opportunities are also strength." Inside the Taoist palace, while Li Mu and Jade Sun were chatting, Qing Qingzi's face was pale and his body was trembling slightly in Xuanzong Discipline Peak. Standing in front of him was not only the Discipline Peak Elder, but there were also 2 martial granduncles of the Miao generation and 2 grand elders of the Dao generation. Besides the sect master, Xuanzong's 7th realm elders were all here. An old man with a face full of wrinkles, white eyebrows, and a white beard said with a gloomy expression, "Such a thing actually happened during the exchange that occurs once every 5 years. Does the Talisman Puppet sect even respect my profound sect?" The other old man next to him narrowed his eyes and said, "Maybe they think that because Fulu School has a 4th transcendent cultivator, they can compare to Xuanzong. If I remember correctly, the 2 from Fulu School have less than 2 years left. In 2 years, Fulu School will be the weakest of the 6 sects. They can't even compare to Danding sect and Spirit Formation sect." Only Taoist Miao Dun looked at Qing Qingzi and asked seriously, "Did you really kill that fox demon?" Qing Qingzi knew that he couldn't hide it in front of these elders. He said regretfully, I didn't know that the fox demon was the sister of the Fu Lu school's martial granduncles. Taoist Miao Dun said angrily, I didn't expect you to do such a thing. Come, let's go see the sect master. Elder Bai Mei looked at Taoist Miao Dun and said, Wait. Taoist Miao Dun frowned and said, Martial uncle, Qing Chengzi violated the sect rules. Elder Bai Mei looked at her and said, In the Miao generation, your talent is second only to your senior brother. Now, even Miao Xian and Fu Lu School's Yuzhen have already transcended, but you're still in Dongxian. Stay in the sect and cultivate. Break through as soon as possible. Don't worry about anything else. Martial uncle, you can leave. Taoist Miao Dun looked at Elder Bai Mei. After taking a deep breath, she bowed and said, This disciple will take her leave. After she left, Elder Bai Mei glanced at Qing Qingzi and said, It's just killing a few demons. Those who are not of our race must have a different heart. The great Zhou court is muddle-headed and treats demons as common people. Sooner or later, they will be harmed. Now that all the cultivators in Zhou province are gathered here, if we punish a Xuanzong disciple for a few demons, won't we, Xuanzong, be ridiculed by all the cultivators in the world? Qing Qingzi was overjoyed. Since the Grand Elder said so, he had nothing to worry about. The other Xuanzong elders also fell into deep thought. The Grand Elder's words made sense. If it were any other time, given the relationship between Fu Lu School and Xuanzong, an ordinary Xuanzong disciple would probably be expelled from the sect for committing such a big mistake. Even a fourth-generation core disciple, like Qing Qingzi, would be severely punished. But now it was the quinquennial Taoist exchange. All the Taoist cultivators in Zhou province were gathered in Xuanzong. If this matter were to spread, it would damage Xuanzong's reputation. As the top sect of Taoism, Xuanzong's reputation was much more important than a fourth-generation disciple. Elder Bai Mei looked coldly at Qing Qingzi and said, From now on, you are not allowed to leave the sect until you reach Dongxian. Qing Qingzi had just reached the 5th realm. Although he could enjoy a lot of resources in the sect, he did not know how long it would take for him to reach the 6th realm. Although he was unwilling, he could only bow and say respectfully, as the Grand Elder commands. Xuanzong, Peak Taoist Palace. Li Mu was still talking with Jade Sun when Miao Yuanzi flew in alone. Miao Yuanzi asked, What's the result? Miao Yuanzi cupped his fists and said, Sect Master Senior Brother, just now at Discipline Peak, Grand Elder personally performed a soul search on Qing Qingzi. This matter is indeed not his doing. There should be a misunderstanding. Miao Yuanzi frowned imperceptibly and asked, What about Qing Qingzi? Miao Yuanzi said, Although this matter was not done by Qing Qingzi, as a disciple of Xuanzong, he embarrassed Xuanzong in front of so many Taoist cultivators. Uncle Master has already punished him to face the wall in seclusion. He is not allowed to come out for 10 years. The 4 elders of Danding Sect, Spirit Array Sect, and the South and North Sect heard Miao Yuanzi's words, and their expressions changed subtly. Miao Yuanzi was silent for a moment and said, I'll go see the Grand Elder. An old man floated in from outside and said lightly, No need. If you want to see this old man, you can say it here. Miao Yuanzi cupped his fists and said, Greetings, Uncle Master. Jade Sun and the others also bowed and saluted. Greetings, Uncle Master Dao Qingzi. Today's Xuanzong, the Taoist names of the 1st to 4th generation disciples were Dao, Miao, Hua, and Qing. Dao Qingzi was a famous Taoist powerhouse who was 1 generation higher than the 6 sect masters. Miao Yuanzi looked at the white-browed old man and asked, Uncle Master, Qing Qingzi, the white-browed old man said, I've already punished Qing Qingzi. How did you become the sect master? When your master was still in power, Xuanzong was so powerful. In your generation, you were framed, and you didn't even protect your own disciple. If Senior Brother knew about this in the underworld, I'm afraid he would doubt his original decision and regret passing the position of sect master to you. After reprimanding Miao Yuanzi, he looked at Li Mu and said in a deep voice, You insulted my Xuanzong. For the sake of the Fu Lu school, I won't argue with a junior like you this time. If there's a next time, I'll destroy your cultivation and let Xianjizi come to Penglai Mountain personally to take you back." As his voice fell, he flicked his sleeves and left. Inside the Dao Palace, Miao Yunzi's expression was complicated. He looked at Li Mu and his lips moved. "Junior brother." Li Mu smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to say more. Since it's a misunderstanding, I apologize to Xuanzong for my impulse just now. Goodbye." After that, he held Xiao Bai's hand and strode out of the Dao Palace. Miao Yunzi looked at Li Mu's back and sighed softly. One called him junior brother, and the other called him fellow Taoist. This change in address indicated that the relationship between Xuanzong and the Fulu school could no longer be the same as before. Outside the Dao Palace, many Xuanzong disciples stood in the distance with different expressions. Some looked ashamed, some looked smug. Qing Xuanzi's face lit up with joy. He looked at Li Mu with a mocking expression and snorted. "So what if you're a second-generation disciple of the Fulu school? You're only asking for humiliation if you try to provoke the dignity of Xuanzong." As Li Mu flew down, a figure flew from behind. Jade Sun flew to his side and comforted him. "Junior brother, don't be impulsive. This is Xuanzong. You're alone and weak. Once you're impulsive, you'll be bullied by them." Li Mu smiled and said, "Thank you for your reminder, senior sister. I won't be impulsive." Looking at Li Mu's back, Jade Sun thought for a moment and took out a sound transmission instrument. After hesitating for a long time, she injected her spiritual energy. A white light flashed on the instrument. Jade Sun took a deep breath and whispered a few words into the instrument. At the entrance of the Fulu pavilion, Xiao Bai bit her lips and wiped her tears. She looked up at Li Mu and said, "Benefactor, I won't take revenge." Li Mu reached out and held her face. He wiped away her tears and said softly, "I promise you, I'll let you kill your enemy and avenge your grandmother and your clan." He looked up at the countless mountains floating in the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. He said lightly, "Xuanzong." The sound transmission instrument in the storage space vibrated. Li Mu took out an object and said calmly, "Senior brother." Xianjizi's voice came from the instrument. "Junior sister Jade Sun has already told me about what happened in Xuanzong. Xuanzong is the #1 sect of Taoism. Its strength is tyrannical." Li Mu asked, "Does senior brother want to persuade me to let the matter rest?" From the instrument, Xianjizi's voice gradually became cold. "Xuanzong is the #1 sect of Taoism. Its strength is tyrannical. However, my Fulu school is not made of mud. Junior brother, please bear with it for half a day. 2 martial uncles and junior sister are already on their way to Xuanzong." Chapter 537. Xuanzong on the Taoist Field. A Xuanzong Dongxian elder replaced Miao Yunzi and preached to the tens of thousands of cultivators in the field. Most of what he talked about was the foundation of cultivation. At this moment, some people in the field were seriously comprehending, while others were still curious about the result of the incident just now. Although Xuanzong was powerful, Fulu School was also one of the 6 Taoist sections. They wondered if Xuanzong would disregard the brotherhood of the sect for an inner disciple. Soon, Qing Yunzi, Qing Songzi, Qing Xuanzi, and several other 4th-generation disciples returned to the field from the Taoist palace above. Then, a stream of light flashed, and Miao Yunzi floated in the air. He looked at the crowd and said lightly, "What happened just now was a misunderstanding. Now that it has been clarified, there is no need to think too much." Although Miao Yunzi said so, there were more than 10,000 people in the field, and there was no lack of clever people. How could they not know the deeper meaning of his words? If it was really a misunderstanding, the senior from Fulu School would have appeared with him at this moment, but he was alone at this moment. It seemed that Xuanzong chose to protect the disciples of his sect for the sake of face, and did not care about the feelings of Fulu School at all. Even if they felt that this was not a good move, Xuanzong undoubtedly had the strength to do so. In the world of cultivation, strength was everything. Without strength, there was no right to reason. This was the sorrow of weak forces But they did not expect that the powerful Fu Lu school would have such a day. As the #1 Taoist sect, Xuanzong had strength above all in the world of cultivation. Everything included the other 5 sections. In the field, no one blamed Xuanzong, and few people sympathized with Fu Lu school, because this was the rule of the world of cultivation. At this time, in the market, the cultivators who did not go to listen to the preaching were almost crazy. The Fu Lu Pavilion had just released the news that they would sell Fu Lu books below the heaven rank for free. They did not need spiritual jades, and as long as they provided materials for writing talismans, the Fu Lu Pavilion would write talismans for them for free. The yellow rank Fu Lu Pavilion provided 1 portion of talisman fluid, 2 portions of profound rank, and 4 portions of earth rank. The Fu Lu school would then write corresponding talismans for them. Everyone knew that the higher the level of the Fu Lu, the lower the success rate of forming a talisman. If one went to any sect or family that was good at Fu Lu and asked for an earth rank Fu Lu, which one of them would not ask for more than 10 portions of spiritual liquid and a large amount of spiritual jades? As long as they asked for 4 portions of spiritual liquid, they would be guaranteed an earth rank Fu Lu. What was the difference between this and giving them for free? No, this wasn't a free gift. This was simply Fu Lu school making a loss. The only troublesome thing was that they could only register now. The Fu Lu had to be collected in 3 months at the Fu Lu Pavilion in Shandu, Guizhou. No one suspected anything fishy because the Fu Lu Pavilion did not want their talisman fluid or their spiritual jades. They only needed to register here, and then 3 months later bring their talisman fluid or spiritual jades converted from talisman fluid to Shandu, Guizhou. The Fu Lu school would then fulfill its promise. As a great sect with 1,000 years of history, the Fu Lu school's reputation was not to be doubted. Although the process was a bit troublesome, the return was huge. For a time, there was a long line at the entrance of the Fu Lu Pavilion. In the market square, no matter if it was the shops on the street or the small stalls in the square, there was not a single customer. Many stall owners and shopkeepers had already packed up their stalls and shops and formed a long line at the entrance of the Fu Lu Pavilion. Inside the Fu Lu Pavilion, the disciples and the cultivators who had come at the last minute were furiously writing down the information of the people who had ordered the Fu Lu. Ma Feng maintained the discipline of the crowd. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn Xuanzong, I'm not giving you a single piece of spiritual jade." The cultivators in the line outside all had Dharma sound transmission artifacts and were constantly communicating. "Second uncle, hurry up and close the shop. Come to the Fu Lu Pavilion. Father, hurry up and prepare some spiritual medicine and spiritual jades. We're going to Shindu, Guizhou right now. Old Ma, are you at the training hall? Don't listen. Why are you still listening to such useless things at a time like this? Hurry up and come to the Fu Lu Pavilion. There's a big bargain. Don't blame me for not reminding you if you're late." In the Xuanzong training hall, Miao Yuanzi was preaching. At some point in time, cultivators began to leave one after another. In the past, when he preached, this kind of situation would occur, but it was never on such a scale. Some of them left in a hurry after receiving the message from the Dharma sound transmission artifact. Some saw the people around them leave and also left after asking. When nearly 1,000 people left inexplicably, some Xuanzong disciples went to investigate and finally found the source of this matter. On the celestial mountain floating at the highest point of the sea, a Xuanzong elder said to Miao Yuanzi, "Sect Master, the Fu Lu school's actions have broken the rules of the market. We can't allow them to continue like this." Miao Yuanzi felt guilty in his heart. When he heard this, he only waved his hand and said, "Let them be." The elder frowned slightly. "But Sect Master, this goes against the rules set by me, Xuanzong." Miao Yuanzi glanced at him and said, "I said, don't interfere in this matter." The elder looked up at him and slowly retreated. After leaving the Taoist palace, he flew to another mountain. In the Taoist palace, Taoist Master Miao Dun looked at Miao Yuanzi and asked, "Senior brother, don't you think that Xuanzong has changed and is no longer the Xuanzong of the past?" Miao Yuanzi looked in the direction that the elder disappeared and sighed. In the end, he was indifferent and speechless. Not long after, accompanied by two elders, Taoist Chengzi flew out of the mountain and went straight to the market below. His face was gloomy, and he said in a low voice, "It seems that the Fu Lu school really doesn't take Xuanzong seriously these years. Since that's the case, I'll teach this arrogant disciple a lesson on behalf of Fu Daozi." On the third floor of the Fu Lu pavilion, there was an hourglass on the table in front of Li Mu. It was the hourglass that he used to keep track of time when refining pills. At this moment, the sand in the hourglass was almost gone, and there was only a small handful left. Before the sand was completely gone, a powerful aura suddenly came from the top of the Fu Lu pavilion. It was the aura of Xuanzong's grand elder, Taoist Chengzi. Taoist Chengzi's figure flew from above, and he said angrily, "Junior of the Fu Lu school, you've repeatedly challenged my, Xuanzong's, bottom line today. I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of Fu Daozi." The voice of Xuanzong's grand elder reverberated in the market and into the ears of countless cultivators. At this moment, everyone's impression of the Fu Lu school had improved greatly. Xuanzong's behavior just now was extremely immoral, and now it was even more outrageous. A grand elder of a sect with a cultivation of the seventh realm was bullying a fifth realm junior. How could such behavior be done by a fellow Taoist? Just as the surrounding cultivators began to sympathize with the young man from the Fu Lu school, on the third floor of the Fu Lu pavilion, Li Mu looked at the remaining sand in the hourglass and took a step forward. He was already outside the Fu Lu pavilion. He looked directly at Taoist Chengzi and said coldly, "Xuanzong, you shameless old man. Do you think you're qualified to teach me a lesson on behalf of my master?" There was a long line of cultivators at the entrance of the Fu Lu pavilion. When Li Mu's voice rang out, the noisy market instantly fell silent. If Xuanzong scolded their grand elder like this, the Fu Lu school would probably completely fall out with Xuanzong this time. Although this sentence pleased many cultivators, they also knew that this young man's fate would probably be very miserable. After all, there was an insurmountable gap between their cultivation levels. Taoist Chengzi also did not expect this young man to be so presumptuous. His face instantly darkened. In the void, an invisible hand grabbed at Li Mu. It was the same divine power that Miao Yuanzi had used, but its power was completely different. Li Mu felt that his body was trapped by the power of heaven and earth, and could not move at all. Even the ordinary Dongxian could only watch as the giant hand grabbed at him, let alone the creation realm cultivators. This reminded Li Mu of the first time he met the Lord of Illusions. However, he was no longer the weak cultivator with divine power that he used to be. Li Mu used his mind to disperse the power of heaven and earth around him. The law bell flew out of his body and merged with Li Mu's body. At the same time, a Fu Lu talisman appeared in Li Mu's hand. He used his dermic powers to activate the talisman. The Fu Lu burned, and the shadow of a woman walked out of the Fu Lu. She exuded the aura of a sixth realm cultivator. Below, the crowd exclaimed in surprise. He's actually planning to resist. This aura, is this a heaven-grade golden armor divine army talisman? It seems a little different. Even a heaven-grade divine army talisman is useless. A sixth realm cultivator is no threat to Elder Dao Chengzi. To everyone's surprise, the shadow of the woman who walked out of the Fu Lu didn't attack Dao Chengzi. Instead, she merged with the young man from the Fu Lu school, causing his aura to rise to the sixth realm in an instant. The invisible giant hand was already reaching for him. Li Mu didn't dodge. The bell shadow on his body flashed, and the giant hand collapsed. The bell shadow also collapsed and dissipated. He knew very well that the Empress Divine Avatar wouldn't exist in his body for long. Before Dao Chengzi could do anything else, he had already launched an attack. He used his mind to control the power of heaven and earth. Wind and thunder intertwined around Dao Chengzi. The sixth realm elders of the Black Sect who had rushed over after hearing the commotion felt a chill in their hearts when they saw the wind and thunder. This was definitely a supernatural power that only a sixth realm cultivator could use. Dao Chengzi stood where he was and looked at Li Mu indifferently. A protective shield appeared around his body, blocking the astral wind and lightning outside his body. The next moment, dark clouds suddenly gathered above his head. Wind mixed with black raindrops fell, and the shield around Dao Chengzi's body started to thin rapidly. The dragon clans called the wind and summoned the rain. A hint of shock flashed across his eyes. Outsiders might not know, but he knew better than anyone else that the power of these spells was comparable to that of the most powerful cultivators in Dongxian. Of course, this was far from enough for him. He floated in the air and only maintained a shield. He didn't do anything else. Even with his status and position, he had failed to capture a fifth-level junior personally. If he were to make a move again, even he would lose face. When he used all his trump cards and completely understood that the gap between the two realms couldn't be closed no matter what he did, he would realize how laughable he was. He would become a joke who overestimated himself and was like an ant trying to shake a tree. Countless elders from Xuanzong had already flown out. They floated quietly outside, and no one intervened. If they had to intervene in the battle between the Grand Elder and the Junior from Fulu School, after this exchange, Xuanzong would also become the biggest joke in Zhuzhou. However, they looked at Li Mu with fear that shouldn't exist. The disciples of the Qing generation looked at the battle in the sky. Instead of fear, they were shocked and terrified. This person was only the same age as them, but he could already fight the Grand Elder. Even if he lost in the end, no one had the right to laugh at him. In the sky, Li Mu didn't have time to pay attention to the discussions below. Without a doubt, without relying on the Empress or the demonic corpse, Dao Chengzi was the most powerful enemy he had ever encountered. His most powerful attack couldn't even break through the defense set up by Dao Chengzi. There seemed to be a natural barrier between the two of them. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't cross it. If he couldn't fight head-on, he could only use his wits. Li Mu took a deep breath. His Qingxian sword flew out instantly, turning into sword shadows that filled the sky, and attacked Dao Chengzi. Tens of thousands of swords flew out. A sixth realm elder from Xuanzong narrowed his eyes. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "What a powerful Daoist technique. With this technique, he can probably fight Dongxian as a creation and transcend as a Dongxian. With his current cultivation level, not many people in Xuanzong can take this technique head-on." Jade Sun floated in the distance and murmured, "This Daoist technique has probably touched the edge of the seventh realm. In other words, if we really fight, we won't be his match at all." Dao Chengzi's expression was still calm as he looked at the sword shadows that filled the sky. However, a hint of seriousness appeared in his eyes. He strengthened the shield outside his body. The sword shadows crashed into the shield and collapsed one after another. However, the dermic power shield also thinned at a speed visible to the naked eye before finally dissipating. However, there were only a few sword shadows left. Dao Chengzi's dermic power swept out. He stared at Li Mu indifferently and said, "Junior, what other skills do you have? Show them all." Before he finished speaking, his eyes narrowed. The last few sword shadows collapsed under the sweep of his dermic power. However, there was still an illusory sword that didn't slow down. It pierced through his forehead at a speed that couldn't be dodged. The small sword pierced through his forehead. Dao Chengzi's body wasn't injured at all, but his primordial spirit was instantly injured. Under the gaze of countless ancestral state cultivators, Xuanzong disciples, and elders, their Grand Supreme Elder spat out a mouthful of blood. His aura instantly weakened by half. He was injured. He was injured at the hands of a seventh realm junior. Countless people were shocked. Their faces were filled with disbelief. A seventh realm transcendent expert was injured by a fifth realm cultivator? Outside the Fulu Pavilion, the Fulu School disciples' breathing quickened. Their bodies trembled as they stared at the figure floating in the air. This was their martial uncle and martial granduncle. This was the integrity of the Fulu School. Two streams of tears slowly fell from Xiao Bai's limpid eyes. Unlike the Fu Lu school disciples, her eyes were filled with affection as she looked at the figure. In the air, Li Mu's face was pale. He imitated Dao Chengzi's tone and said indifferently, "Old thing, you're still pretending?" Chapter 538. The market, the training ground, and the countless figures floating in the air were all silent. Only Li Mu's voice echoed on the sea. Just now, everyone had witnessed a miracle. A cultivator in the creation realm had actually injured a transcendent realm cultivator in a head-on battle, but he himself was unharmed. This battle was enough to be recorded in the history of the cultivation world. When future generations mentioned the Fu Lu school and Xuanzong at the same time, they couldn't ignore this battle that spanned two major realms. The elders of Xuanzong floated in the air, still motionless. It wasn't that they didn't want to move, but that they couldn't. The Grand Elder was in the 7th realm, fighting against a 5th realm junior. Did he need their help? Now that things had developed to this point, it was completely out of Xuanzong's control. It was the opposite of their original goal. Xuanzong had protected Qing Qingzi because he didn't want the school to be disgraced. Now, all the cultivators on the Zhu continent knew that Xuanzong had protected his disciple and bullied the weak. The Grand Elder's face had been beaten to the ground, and Xuanzong's face had been completely destroyed. If they had known that things would come to this, they would have punished Qing Qingzi severely. But now, this had nothing to do with Qing Qingzi. Xuanzong needed to establish his authority and regain his lost face. In the air, Dao Chengzi's vital spirit was injured, and his aura was weakened. His face was extremely pale, but not because of his injury, but because of the humiliation. He had been humiliated by a junior in front of all the disciples of Xuanzong, and in front of more than 10,000 cultivators. At this moment, he wanted to kill that person for the first time. His voice was cold as he said word by word, "Junior, you disrespected your elders and deceived your master. Today, I will punish you on behalf of Fu Lu School." After all, Dao Chengzi was a super expert who had reached the 7th level many years ago. If Li Mu hadn't caught him off guard and mixed the intellectual sword into the 10,000 sword shadows, he wouldn't have been able to injure Dao Chengzi at all. When he was in the 5th realm, his wisdom sword could slash Dongxuan's primordial spirit. Now that his cultivation had temporarily increased to the 6th realm, he could only slightly injure Dao Chengzi. However, he wasn't afraid of Dao Chengzi. In the face of Dao Chengzi's threat, Li Mu ignored it. He turned around and flew toward the Fu Lu Pavilion. At the same time, on the 3rd floor of Fu Lu Pavilion, the last strand of sand fell from the hourglass. Dao Chengzi's killing intent surged as he raised a hand at Li Mu's back. But at this moment, 3 streams of light suddenly appeared on the western horizon and sped over. A loud voice exploded in the sky. "Dao Chengzi, do you think everyone in Fu Lu School is dead?" The other 2-level 7 cultivators in Xuanzong couldn't sit still anymore. They flew up to stop them. "Uncle Masters, let's talk. Let's sit down and talk. Don't hurt our friendship." Tian Yangzi attacked with all his strength. He said coldly, "Friendship? My ass. Dao Chengzi is going to clean up our Fu Lu School. What's there to talk about? I don't have much time left, but my Fu Lu School isn't a place that anyone can mess with. If you want to humiliate my Fu Lu School, wait until I'm dead." The Xuanzong Taoist priest said, "Fu Lu School and Xuanzong are brothers. Uncle Masters, please stop. Don't hurt our friendship." Tian Chengzi trapped the 2 Xuanzong Grand Supreme Elders with his Fu Lu. His voice was equally cold. "When you, Xuanzong, covered up your disciples and humiliated my Fu Lu School, why didn't you think of your brothers?" The injured Dao Chengzi was forced to retreat in defeat by Tian Yangzi. The other 2 Grand Supreme Elders were also trapped. Xuanzong had 5 7th realm cultivators. Only Miao Yunzi and another Grand Supreme Elder were left. At a certain moment, an angry roar came from an upside-down mountain. An old man flew out and said angrily, Tian Yangzi, Tian Chengzi, don't go too far. He wanted to help Dao Changzi, but was stopped by Yuzhen. The old man looked at Yuzhen and said gloomily, Nephew Yuzhen, you want to stop me? Yuzhen looked at him indifferently and said coldly, When Dao Changzi bullied my junior brother, did you ever think that he was your nephew? The cultivators below looked up at the sky in silence. Seventh Realm cultivators were always elusive. Ordinary people rarely saw them. Today, they saw 7 of them at the same time. 7 transcending state cultivators were fighting in a chaotic battle. High up in the sky, the light of spells was unceasing. If their battle was on the ground, the whole of Xuanzong would probably be destroyed. Even from so far away, everyone could feel the waves of pressure. No matter what the result was, Xuanzong's reputation was completely destroyed this time. In the Taoist palace on the highest mountain, the bright light of spells shone into the palace. Miao Dun looked at Miao Yunzi and asked, You're not going to help? Miao Yunzi shook his head. No. Miao Dun said, If you don't help, Uncle Master will have an excuse later. Miao Yunzi breathed a sigh of relief and said, I've been in the sect for too long. I'm bored. I'm just thinking of going out for a walk. Miao Dun was silent for a moment and said, I also want to go out for a walk and find an opportunity to break through. In the market and on the training grounds, the cultivators of the Zoo continent have been looking up for a long time. The battle in the sky didn't have a result. Obviously, the Fulu school and Xuanzong had a big conflict. The 3 elders of the Fulu school came from afar, but the cultivators of the 2 sects couldn't really fight to the death. Up in the sky, the battle was still going on. However, at a certain moment, everyone suddenly disappeared. After a moment of shock, everyone was in an uproar. Where are they? Why did they all disappear? Strange. Why can't I see anyone? In an instant, the elders of the 2 sects disappeared. At the entrance of the Fulu pavilion, Li Mu's vision blurred. When he reappeared, he was in another space. This space was very big, much bigger than the Emperor's secret garden, but not as big as Li Mu's Demon Emperor's space. Other than the size, there was a big difference between this space and Li Mu's Demon Emperor's space. After the Demon Emperor's space had a new master, it went from being dead silent to full of vitality. There were mountains, rivers, lakes, grass, trees, fish, and insects. It was like a small world. Although there were mountains, rivers, trees, and grass in this space, there was no life. The mountains were gray. The trees on the mountains were withered. There wasn't a trace of green. The water was black. There wasn't a single fish swimming in the water. The grass under Li Mu's feet was yellow. The entire space was dead silent. The 2 Taishang elders and Yuzenzi were beside Li Mu. In front of them were the 4 elders of Xuanzong. In the middle of the withered grass, an old man sat cross-legged. The old man had no eyebrows or beard. There were only a few strands of messy hair on his bald head. Wrinkles crisscrossed his face, mixed with brown patches. He sat there with his eyes closed and his head bowed. There was no breath coming from him. He was like a dead man. But in Li Mu's eyes, what sat there was not a person, but a mountain. This mountain stood tall and lofty, unreachable. Chapter 539. The elders of the Fulu school in Xuanzong were originally at daggers drawn, but the moment they saw this old man, they restrained their fighting spirit and became respectful. Greetings, martial uncle. Everyone bowed respectfully, and even the 2 grand elders of the Talisman Puppet sect were no exception. The old man opened his eyes. Li Mu discovered that his eyes were turbid and lifeless, his pupils unfocused and unfocused. He seemed to be blind. He faced Li Mu's group of 4 and said in a low voice, Have you caused enough trouble? If you've caused enough trouble, then go back. Although the old man was blind, when he faced Li Mu still felt as if a pair of eyes were piercing through his body. When facing Dao Qingzi, he still had the will to fight, but in front of this old man, he simply could not summon any fighting spirit. Yuzhen's lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but a grand elder stopped him and bowed. Sorry to disturb you, martial uncle. He waved his sleeves, swept up Li Mu and Yuzhan's Grand Elder, and flew upwards. After flying past a certain height, Li Mu's surroundings changed, and he once again returned to the sky above Xuanzong. From beginning to end, the old man had only said one sentence, and it was enough to extinguish the anger of the two Grand Elders and make them take the initiative to retreat. The old man's identity was already on the verge of being revealed. It was rumored that Xuanzong, as the #1 sect of the Taoism, had a deep foundation and even had an 8th realm expert within the sect. Today, Li Mu knew that this was not a legend. The 7th realm expert gave Li Mu the feeling of a tall mountain, but it was not unreachable. He could always see the summit, but in this tall mountain, Li Mu could see the clouds halfway up the mountain. As for how high it was beyond the clouds, he could not even imagine it. Yuzhan's Grand Elder frowned. Martial Uncle, the disciple that Xuanzong is protecting, Tianyangzi, shook his head and looked at Li Mu. Child, it's because the sect isn't strong enough that you have to suffer. The Taishang Elder didn't say it explicitly, but Li Mu understood what he meant. Xuanzong's 8th level cultivator had made his stance clear. It was impossible to take Qing Chengzi away from Xuanzong. Above transcendence was unification of the way. In the entire ancestral state, among the 6 Taoist sects and the Great Zhou court, only Xuanzong had such a powerhouse. No one could defy his will. Li Mu bowed to the 3 and said, "Many thanks, martial uncles and senior sister Yuzhan." The 2 elders smiled and said, "Before we 2 old men die, no one can bully you for no reason." At the entrance of Fu Lu Pavilion, Qing Jingzi had already gathered all the disciples of Fu Lu School, including the dozen or so female cultivators. The Taishang Elder released a giant boat, and everyone flew onto it. Li Mu stood at the bow of the boat, raised his hand, and gently pressed down. An enormous handprint appeared in the sky above the Talisman Pavilion. Boom! There was a loud noise and dust. From then on, there was no more Fu Lu Pavilion in Xuanzong. Li Mu looked around and imprinted everything here in his mind. One day, he would return to this place. Soon, the flying boat turned into a stream of light and flew into the sky, disappearing into the horizon. Countless cultivators looked into the distance. They would never forget their experience in Xuanzong, nor would they forget the immortal legend who dared to fight a transcendence cultivator with a creation realm cultivation. The name of Fu Lu School's Li Mu would soon be known by everyone in the cultivation world of ancestral state. Xuanzong, on the highest floor of the Taoist palace, cultivators above the 6th level of Xuanzong were gathered. Dao Chengzi looked coldly at Miao Yunzi and asked in a deep voice, "As the headmaster of Xuanzong, when the people of Fu Lu School attacked the mountain gate, you just stood by and watched. Why do you have to be the headmaster?" Faced with his rebuke, Miao Yunzi took off the Taoist crown on his head and said, "You're right, Uncle Master. From today onwards, I will resign as the headmaster and go out to wander the world to seek the way. The headmaster position will be temporarily taken by other brothers. Senior brother, please reconsider." Several people in the Taoist palace changed their expressions and tried to persuade him. Miao Yunzi just waved his hand and said, "I've made up my mind. There's no need to say more." Dao Chengzi picked up the Taoist crown that symbolized the position of the headmaster of Xuanzong and said lightly, "You are a sinner of Xuanzong. You are indeed unfit to be the headmaster. Miao Xuanzi, you will temporarily take the headmaster position." A figure stood out and took the Taoist crown. He said respectfully, "Yes, master." The Grand Elder acted arbitrarily and forced the headmaster to abdicate and let his disciple take over. This caused many elders to be dissatisfied. How can the headmaster position be decided by the Grand Elder alone? Grand Elder, you're overstepping your bounds. Even if someone takes over the headmaster position temporarily, he has to ask Elder Tianjizi before making a decision. Faced with the overbearing Grand Elder, everyone spoke up until a figure slowly walked into the Taoist palace from outside. The old man had his hands behind his back and his body was hunched. He limped as if he could fall down at any time. It was such an old man that made all the powerhouses in the Taoist palace bow and greet him respectfully. Greetings, Uncle Master. Greetings, Uncle Master. As the only 8th-level powerhouse in the sect, the old man had dedicated his life to Xuanzong. He used divination to reach the Tao integration stage and divined all the heavenly secrets for the sect. Xuanzong's strength was inseparable from the old man's guidance. The heavenly secrets were hard to predict to begin with. Divining people was already extremely difficult, let alone divining the fate of the #1 sect of the Taoist sect. For more than 100 years, Elder Tianjizi had made great contributions to the sect with his unpredictable divination skills. However, he had also suffered a backlash from the heavenly Tao. He had lost his sight and suffered injuries that were difficult to recover from. He was Xuanzong's disciple, including the 7th-level elders, and was the most respected existence in their hearts. The old man walked in front of everyone and said slowly, "While Miao Yunzi is traveling, Dao Chengzi will temporarily be in charge of the sect's affairs." Since Uncle Master Tianjizi had spoken, no one in the sect would object. Dao Chengzi was delighted and immediately cupped his hands. "Yes, Uncle Master." As expected, after the old man spoke, no one objected. They all bowed and said, "Yes, Uncle Master." No one in Xuanzong doubted Uncle Master Tianjizi's words. His divination skills were unparalleled in the world. He didn't even need to explain his orders because he could see the future that no one else could. The old man looked at Dao Chengzi and said, "Xuanzong's future is in your hands." Dao Chengzi's expression was solemn. He said, "I will definitely manage the sect well and not disappoint Uncle Master." Not long after, in the sky above the Eastern Sea, Miao Dun looked at Miao Yunzi and asked, "You're leaving just like that?" Grandmaster didn't pass the position to Uncle Master Dao Chengzi because his temperament wasn't suitable to be the sect leader. He was worried that he would completely destroy Xuanzong. "Once you leave, Xuanzong will be able to do whatever he wants." Miao Yunzi said, "This is Uncle Master's intention. Don't you trust him?" Miao Dun was silent for a long time before he said, "I agree with Uncle Master's every decision. Only this time, but he can see much further than us. Is Uncle Master Dao Chengzi really Xuanzong's future?" In a dead silent space, Tianjizi sat cross-legged on the withered grass. He closed his eyes and made a gesture of pinching his fingers. Soon, a trace of blood flowed out from his mouth. In this space, the grass and trees became even more withered and yellow. Tianjizi slowly opened his eyes and murmured, "There can be no construction without destruction. Only by seeking life in death can there be a sliver of fate." In the sky above the Eastern Sea, on the huge spirit boat, Limu had already learned the identity of the old man in Xuanzong. Tianjizi was the only elder of the Tian generation in Xuanzong. He was also the elder with the highest seniority in Taoism. With his unfathomable divination skills, he had helped Taoism avoid several catastrophes in his life. One of the important reasons why Diabolism did not dare to invade on a large scale was that Tianjizi had not yet fallen. But this was not a reason for Xuanzong to bully others. Limu had promised Xiao Bai that he would let her personally avenge the death of her clan members. He had left Xuanzong today, but the matter between him and Xuanzong had only just begun. Limu contacted Xianjizi with a communication talisman and told him that he was going to rebuild the Fulu Pavilion in Shandu. Limu did not intend to be so ruthless, but now that things had come to this, he no longer needed to give Xuanzong any face. At this moment, a large portion of the Zhou province cultivators in Xuanzong had reserved the Fulu Pavilion. They would come to Great Zhou's Shun due to collect talismans within 3 months. The price was so low that it defied common sense. If others were to write talismans, they would naturally lose out. But if Limu did it himself, he would make a great profit. He wanted to build a cultivation market square in Shandu that was even larger than Xuanzong. The imperial court would only take a maximum of 10% of the profits from the peddlers in the market square. He would also build a Dao field next to the market square and invite experts from the Department of Worship to preach the Dao every few days. The market square and Dao field would be open all year round. With the imperial court's influence and Shandu's excellent location at the center of the Zhu continent, this Taoist exchange meeting in Xuanzong would be the last. When they passed by Shandu, Limu and Xiao Bai got off the flying boat first. The two Taishang elders and Yuzenzi continued north to return to the ancestral court. As soon as Limu stepped into the house, the space in the courtyard fluctuated. The empress walked out with Mr. Mei and Shang Wanli. Limu walked forward and said, "Your Majesty," Zhou Yi said with a sullen face. "I know." She walked to Xiao Bai and hugged her gently, saying, "Sister will avenge you." Xuanzong didn't even give face to the Fulu school, let alone the great Zhou court. Limu walked forward and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. Xuanzong is powerful. This matter needs to be discussed at length." Zhou Yi said indifferently, "I won't be so impulsive." She looked at Mr. Mei and asked, "Have you found out?" Mr. Mei nodded and said, "Yes, Xuanzong has a total of 23 orthodoxies in the Great Zhou. They are scattered in the 5 counties in the east. Like the 6 sects of Tao, there was not only one orthodoxy. In addition to the ancestral court, there were also many subsects in charge of providing fresh blood to the ancestral court. Many disciples of the ancestral court were promoted from these subsects. Generally speaking, the Great Zhou court would provide convenience for these subsects. For example, they would be given some blessed land with abundant spiritual energy as a mountain gate for them to use for free." Zhou Yi said coldly, "Order the 5 counties to take back the land the court gave them. Tell them to get lost. From now on, there is no Xuanzong Taoist field in the Great Zhou." Chapter 540. Yintai County, Mount Qingshu. In the current cultivation world, Taoism is the most powerful school. There are 6 schools and countless schools. Most of these schools can be regarded as branches of the 6 schools and have the same Taoist tradition as one of the 6 schools. Among them, Mount Qingshu in Yintai County is an important Xuanzong Taoist school. The Xuanzong Ancestral Court is located outside the East Sea and is isolated from the mainland. It is very inconvenient for it to do things such as recruiting disciples and transmitting messages, which are all done by external Taoist schools. As the Taoist school of Xuanzong, the number 1 school of Taoism, the Qingshu school has an extremely high status in Yintai County. It has about 100 disciples. Its headmaster is a peak creation stage expert and is an elder of the Hua generation in Xuanzong. Xuanzong has a revered status in the cultivation world. The Great Zhou Court also opens the doors to them to set up Taoist schools in various counties and gives them extremely preferential treatment in several eastern counties. Not only does it give them famous mountains and caves to use as gates, it also uses the court's resources to build Taoist temples for them and recommend extremely talented disciples for them, etc. Today, a flying boat suddenly flies towards Mount Qingshu. On the flying boat are several cultivators with high levels of power. They fly to the sky above Mount Qingshu, then put away the flying boat and land. The Qingshu temple's guarding disciples recognize that the newcomer is the Yintai County governor. They step forward and say, "Sir, please wait here for a moment. I'll go to the temple to report to the abbot." The Qingshu temple is backed by Xuanzong, so it does not care about ordinary people. Even if it is an official of Yintai County or a cultivator below the 6th level who comes to visit, they must wait outside the gate. But this time, the Yintai County governor does not wait here. He just waves his hand indifferently and says, "No need." His face darkens. He says, "Do it." Boom. A Yintai County governor picks up a huge hammer, flies up, and smashes it fiercely on the Qingshu school's gate. Under this blow, the Qingshu school's lofty gate, together with the huge plaque with the 3 words Qingshu School written on it, shatters and collapses with a loud rumble. The 2 guarding disciples are already dumbfounded. Looking at the collapsed gate, their lips trembling, they cannot even say a word. Several silhouettes fly out from inside the Taoist temple. A furious voice says, "How dare you? Which thug dares to break into my Qingshu Mountain School?" A man in a Taoist robe flew out of the temple. When he saw who it was, his expression changed and he asked in shock, County Governor Qin, are you crazy? The Yintai County Governor stood in the air and said faintly, His Majesty has decreed that from today onwards, Xuanzong Taoist temples are prohibited within the Great Zhou. Then where do you want us to go? The man asked furiously. The Yintai County chief says expressionlessly, This is your own business. I'll give you a day's time to quickly move out of Mount Qingshu. Otherwise, the county office will take coercive measures. At that time, anyone who dares to obstruct the court's official business will be killed without mercy. The man in the Taoist robe had a gloomy expression. The Yintai County chief did not seem to be joking, and it was impossible for him to make such a joke. This time, the Great Zhou Court is serious. This is a big matter for both the Qingshu School and Xuanzong. He immediately flew back to the Qingshu Mountain School, took out his communication magic tool, and contacted the Ancestral Court. At the same time, the great meeting hall of the Xuanzong Ancestral Court has already become a pot of porridge. The Qingshu School sent a message. The Great Zhou Court gave them a day's time to move out. This is too much. The Tianqin School just sent people. They said their mountain gate was smashed by the Nanyang County Governor, and the Great Zhou Court wants to occupy their Taoist temple to raise chickens and ducks. The Cave Abyss School was also asked to move out. Why did the Great Zhou Court suddenly attack my Xuanzong? Today, all of Xuanzong's Taoist temples in Great Zhou were given an ultimatum by the Great Zhou Court. They were ordered to move out within a day. It seemed that the Great Zhou Court wanted to expel Xuanzong's Taoist temples and drive them overseas. Dao Chengzi had only been in charge of Xuanzong for 2 days, and this happened. This made his expression extremely ugly. He said coldly, What is the Great Zhou Court trying to do? At this time, a Xuanzong elder stepped forward and said, Martial Granduncle, this must have something to do with Ling Jizi of the Fulu School. Dao Chengzi felt a headache when he heard this name. His reputation was completely ruined by this person. This person made him lose face in front of all the cultivators in the world. Dao Chengzi wanted nothing more than to cut him into pieces. He asked in a low voice, What does this have to do with him? The Xuanzong elder Taoist priest said, Martial Granduncle, you may not know this, but Ling Jizi is not only a second-generation disciple of the Fulu School, but he is also an important official of the Great Zhou. He has authority in his hands. There are even rumors that he is the exclusive property of the Great Zhou Empress. Perhaps because he suffered a loss in Xuanzong, the Great Zhou Empress became angry and took revenge on Xuanzong for her lover. Regardless of the reason, the Great Zhou Court's actions did not sit well with Xuanzong. These dozens of Taoist temples were very important to Xuanzong. They were responsible for providing the sect with new blood. The Great Zhou Court's expulsion of these Taoist temples from the country would not affect Xuanzong too much in the short term. However, in the long term, it was a plan to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. As long as Xuanzong opened his mouth, countless people in the cultivation world would join him. However, geniuses needed to be nurtured from a young age. If they missed the opportunity, it would be very difficult for them to become a top expert in the future. In the face of the Great Zhou Court's coercion, Dao Chengzi was silent for a moment. Then, he said, Move a few more islands and temporarily settle them here. Xuanzong has been passed down for thousands of years and has seen many dynasties change. If the Zhou dynasty thinks that they can challenge Xuanzong, I don't mind supporting a new ruler of Zhou province. No one expected Ling Jizi's revenge to come so quickly. All of Xuanzong's Taoist temples were expelled from the country, and a good exchange meeting was ruined. In just a few days, 30% of the cultivators left for Shandu of the Great Zhou. It would not be long before what happened in Xuanzong in the past 2 days spread throughout the cultivation world of Zhou province. As the #1 sect of Taoism, they had lost all face. Xuanzong no longer had a foothold in Great Zhou. At this time, a group of cultivators came from the Thousand Fox Nation in the distant Life province. Ever since the Thousand Fox country and the Great Zhou dynasty had formed an alliance, they had opened up a trade route to each other. Zhejiang County and the Thousand Fox country had even opened up a trade route. Various large sects and families had gradually begun to do business with the demon country. They used spiritual jades, magic treasures, pills, and other items to trade for the Yao Nation's abundant spiritual medicines and profited a lot. In the imperial palace, Illusion Princess paced around in her chambers and muttered to herself, "Humph, it's been so long, and he still hasn't come to see me. He doesn't recognize me after he's done with me. Bastard." At this time, Fox 6 suddenly rushed in and said, "Your Majesty, I just heard something from those human cultivators." Illusion Princess said angrily, "I don't want to hear it now." Fox 6 said, "It's about Li Mu." Illusion Princess immediately looked up. "Speak." Fox 6 said slowly, "I heard a few human cultivators discussing something. They said that a few days ago, Li Mu and Xuanzong had a conflict. Even the seventh realm elders of the two sects were alerted." Fox 6 described Xuanzong's matter in detail. After hearing this, Illusion Princess was furious. She gritted her teeth and said, "Damn it, how dare they bully my man? I'll bring people to flatten their sect." Fox 6 hurriedly advised, "Your Majesty, don't be rash. Xuanzong is the most powerful sect in Zhu province. They have 5 7th realm cultivators, and rumor has it that they even have 8th realm cultivators in their sect. Let alone us. Even the Empress of Great Zhou can't touch Xuanzong. Oh, right, there's someone who wants to trade spiritual medicines with us. It's Xuanzong's disciple." At the entrance of the palace, more than 10 human cultivators were waiting. Although Zhu province was vast and had abundant resources, there were also many people. The spiritual medicines sold everywhere were often expensive and priceless. However, the Yao Nation was different. This place was rich in spiritual medicines, and the demons didn't know how to refine pills or write talismans. They could buy or trade spiritual medicines they needed at a very low price. Standing at the front of the crowd was a man in a Taoist robe. The cultivators tacitly kept their distance from him. Xuanzong's disciples were high and mighty. They didn't want to get close to them, even if they didn't look at them. Not long after, a beautiful demoness walked in from inside. She glanced at the crowd and asked, "Who's Xuanzong's disciple?" The cultivators sighed in their hearts. Xuanzong was indeed Xuanzong. Even in the desolate Yao Nation, Xuanzong's disciples had the privilege of being received first. The man in the Taoist robe stood out. He raised his head and said arrogantly, "I am." The beautiful female demon looked at him and confirmed, "You're Xuanzong's disciple?" The man puffed out his chest and said, "Xuanzong Hua Xuanzi." Fox 6 gaze turned cold. She said indifferently, "Except for this Hua something from Xuanzong, everyone can go in." Hua Xuanzi was stunned. He asked, "What about me?" Fox 6 looked at him and said coldly, "I'll give you 3 breaths. Get out of here and tell your sect that Xuanzong's disciples are not welcome in Qianhu Nation. The next time you dare to step in here, I'll break your legs. Get out." Chapter 541. The cultivators in front of the Palace of Thousand Fox were stunned. They did not know what was going on. Xuanzong's disciples were respected wherever they went, but they were being targeted in the Yao Nation. While Hua Xuanzi was still stunned, Hulu had already started counting down. 1, 2, 3. As soon as she finished her last word, several palace guards flew out. Several beams of Dharma spells engulfed Hua Xuanzi. Hua Xuanzi was Xuanzong's disciple after all. He instantly retreated. He floated in the air and said with a gloomy face, "Do you know what you're doing? How dare you treat Xuanzong like this? Have you foreseen the consequences?" A level 6 demonic corpse flew out of the palace. Hua Xuanzi shut his mouth completely when he sensed the powerful aura. He turned around and ran. He had no choice but to lower his head when he was under someone else's roof. He had to hurry back to the sect and tell the elders what had happened here. The other 10 or so cultivators slowly walked into the palace. The first thing they saw was a human statue. There was also a similar statue at the city gate of Thousand Fox Nation. The appearance of 2 human statues in the Yao Nation reminded them of a rumor. It was said that the current queen of Thousand Fox Nation, the ruler of half of the Yao Nation, had an extraordinary relationship with an important minister in the Great Zhou. When they saw the two statues, they connected it to the conflict between Li Mu and Xuanzong. Then, they connected it to Thousand Fox Nation's rejection of Xuanzong. They knew that the rumor was not just a rumor. In the bedroom, Phantom Princess said to the voice transmission instrument unhappily, "You didn't even tell me about such a big thing. Who do you think I am?" Divine Capital, Li Mansion. Li Mu glanced at Lu Hanyan, who had just returned to Divine Capital. She was talking to Wan Wan and Xiao Bai. He said, "It's not a big deal, so I didn't want to tell you." Phantom Princess did not dwell on the matter. She asked, "When will you come to see me?" Li Mu whispered, "I have a lot of things to do in the next few months. When I'm done, I'll go see you." Illusion Princess rolled around on the bed and asked with a red face, "I missed you. Did you miss me?" Lu Hanyan had already noticed this. If he dared to flirt with her here, he would die here today. Li Mu whispered, "It's not convenient now. I'll contact you later." By the time he put away the sound-transmitting Dharma artifact, Lu Hanyan had already walked over. She looked at Li Mu and said indifferently, "Come with me." Li Mu followed her into the room and said, "I bought some clothes for you. See if there's anything you like." Lu Hanyan sat on the chair and said, "Don't worry." Li Mu continued, "A few days ago, we saw Wan Wan and her parents and family members in the Immortal's capital. They were the same as before. In order to prevent Wan Wan from seeing them sad, I sent people to chase them away." Lu Hanyan nodded and said, "Well done." Then she looked at Li Mu and asked, "Who will you contact later?" Although Li Mu had been hiding it from the Empress, he did not plan to hide it from Lu Hanyan. He looked up at her and said, "There's something I need to confess to you." The accident in Thousand Fox Nation had always been something that Li Mu was too ashamed to talk about. As an indomitable man, he withstood countless temptations, but in the end, he was defeated by a fox. Lu Hanyan's face darkened and asked, "Does Xiaobai know?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "I haven't told her yet. Listen to me. That was really an accident. I didn't expect." Lu Hanyan stood up and snorted coldly. She said, "It's useless to explain to me. You'd better explain to Xiaobai." She walked out of the room and left Li Mu alone. Li Mu decided not to tell Xiaobai that he already had another fox by his side. The most important thing now was to let her take revenge for the murder of her clan and her grandmother. This had become an obsession in her heart. The Heavenly Fox clan's obsession with revenge was so deep that her cultivation had been stagnant for a long time. Li Mu walked to the yard and asked them to choose a few sets of clothes. Then he went to Changle Palace. As soon as he took out the clothes, Zhou Yi glanced at him and said, "They chose these, didn't they?" She got an affirmative answer from Li Mu's expression. She snorted softly and said, "I knew it. If they didn't choose the leftovers, you wouldn't give them to me." Li Mu said helplessly, "Your Majesty, you misunderstood me. I have already chosen a few sets for you. I just wanted to let your Majesty see if there are any that you like." He took out a few other sets of clothes and said, "I have already chosen these for your Majesty." Zhou Yi soon forgave Li Mu and went to the inner hall to try on the clothes. Li Mu looked at Mr. Mei and Shang Wanli and said, "You can also choose a few sets. Although they are not treasures, they look good on you." Mr. Mei glanced at him indifferently and said, "They only gave us the leftovers after others chose." Li Mu waved his hand and put away all the clothes. He said indifferently, "Take it or leave it." Mr. Mei said angrily, "You heartless man. I even asked Zhu Wei to help you get information. How can you treat me like this?" Li Mu was a little slow in putting away the clothes. He asked, "What information?" Mr. Mei glanced at him indifferently and asked, "Do you want to know the background of Xiao Bai's enemy?" Li Mu said, "Xuanzong's fourth-generation disciple." Mr. Mei crossed his arms and said, "Are you stupid? Xuanzong's fourth-generation disciples are also born and raised by their parents. I mean, what country he is from, what his identity is, and who else is in his family." Li Mu paused and said, "Actually, I was just joking. I have already looked out for Sister May's clothes. These clothes are very suitable for your temperament." Shang Wanli asked, "What about me?" Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Go away. You can choose after Sister Mei finishes." Shang Wanli took out a secret document from her sleeve and said, "I have the information from Zhu Wei's investigation." Li Mu took a deep breath and a smile appeared on his face again. He said, "Good Ali, how could I forget you? I was just joking just now. Of course you should choose first. With Sister May's age, there aren't many things here that she can wear. It won't be too late to choose later." In Changle Palace, Mr. May held some clothes and snorted, "How can there be such a shameless person in the world?" Shang Wanli glanced at him and said, "A few days ago, you said that he dared to fight against transcendence with the Fate Realm. He was loyal and righteous. He was a trustworthy person." Li Mu held a secret document in his hand. It was sent from Xuanzong by Zhu Wei's spy. Li Mu did not expect that the imperial court spy would be placed in Xuanzong. This secret document recorded Qin Chengzi's identity in detail. Qin Chengzi's original name was Zhao Chun. He came from a cultivation family in Yan. The Yan kingdom was a small kingdom to the south of Zhuzhou. Its strength was very weak, far inferior to the Shun kingdom, the Jing kingdom, and the Yong kingdom. It was a vassal state of the Great Zhou. For the past 100 years, it had paid tribute to the Great Zhou in order to obtain the Great Zhou's protection and prevent other countries from annexing and invading it. Li Mu left the imperial palace and went directly to the Honglu Temple. Since the last tribute, all the countries in the south, except Yong, had sent envoys to the divine capital. After receiving Li Mu's order, the Honglu Temple official immediately sent for the Yan's envoy. A thin man quickly stepped into the room and said nervously, "What instructions does your excellency have for this humble subject?" Li Mu asked, "Can you get in touch with the Yan imperial family?" The thin man immediately nodded. "Your excellency, we can." Yan imperial family. The envoy sent a message from the Great Zhou's divine capital, causing the entire Yan imperial family to panic. The son of the Zhao family was fortunate enough to join Xuanzong. This was supposed to be the glory of the Zhao family and the Yan imperial family. Unexpectedly, he was wanted by the Great Zhou court. The Yan imperial family was a vassal state of the Great Zhou. The Great Zhou court directly sent the document to the Yan imperial family. As the most powerful country in Zhuzhou, if the Great Zhou was angry, a small country like the Yan imperial family would be silently reduced to ashes. After receiving the message from the Great Zhou court, the Yan imperial family immediately held an emergency meeting and made a decision in the shortest time possible. The order from the Great Zhou could not be disobeyed. The Yan imperial family personally issued a decree ordering the Zhao family to immediately recall Zhao Chun. In the Zhao family, after the messenger left, the head of the Zhao family snorted and threw the imperial decree on the ground. He stepped on it and said, "Bring me a sound-transmitting Dharma artifact. I want to ask Cheng for his opinion." Xuanzong. Qin Chengzi knelt before Dao Chengzi and said worriedly, "Grand Elder, the Great Zhou court is pressuring the Yan imperial family to force my father to hand me over. What should I do? A small country dares to ignore the Xuanzong." Dao Chengzi stood up and waved his sleeve. He said indifferently, "In that case, let the Yan imperial family perish." Obviously, Xuanzong was the only one with such strength and a reason to help the Zhao family. The spies of the imperial court in Xuanzong sent back news that after Li Mu and the others left, the hierarch of Xuanzong, Miao Yunzi, also went out to travel. At this time, the person in charge of Xuanzong was the Grand Elder Taoist priest, Chengzi. With his personality, who valued face more than anything else, he was capable of doing such a thing. The request for help from the Yin Kingdom's envoy caused a huge commotion in the imperial court. After some discussion, a civil official said hesitantly, "Your Majesty, I think that this is the internal affairs of the Yin Kingdom. Great Zhou should not interfere." The Yin Kingdom was a vassal state of Great Zhou and paid tribute to Great Zhou every year. Great Zhou had the responsibility to protect the Yin Kingdom. but the premise was that the Yin Kingdom was invaded by foreign forces. If someone in the Yin Kingdom rebelled, it was the internal affairs of the Yin Kingdom. Since the founding of the Yin Kingdom, Great Zhou had not interfered in the internal affairs of other countries, except for the Shun Kingdom, which provoked the Yin Kingdom. This was the important reason why the southern countries had always been at ease with Great Zhou and paid tribute to the Yin Kingdom. This time, Great Zhou could send troops to help the Yin Kingdom with the reason of bringing order to the chaos. Next time, it might use other reasons to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. Once this rule was broken, the southern countries would be in a state of panic, which was not good for the stability of the Zhou continent. After some discussion, the officials of Great Zhou unanimously decided that the Great Zhou would not send troops to the Yin Kingdom because of the internal strife. After the court, the officials of Great Zhou dispersed. The envoy of the Yin Kingdom walked out of the Ziwei Palace in a daze, his face full of sorrow. This was the sorrow of a small country. Being caught in the middle of the great powers, its fate was no longer in its own control. The Yin Kingdom would soon fall into the hands of the rebels. At this moment, a figure walked past him. Suddenly, something fell from his sleeve. The envoy of the Yin Kingdom picked up a stack of yellow paper talismans and called out to the young official of Great Zhou who had plunged the Yin Kingdom into a whirlpool. He said in a hoarse voice, "Sir, you dropped something." Li Mu turned his head and said lightly, "I didn't drop anything." The envoy of the Yin Kingdom was stunned for a moment. He looked down at the stack of paper talismans in his hand. The talismans on the Fu Lu were extremely complicated. He felt a little dizzy just by looking at them. The talisman paper seemed to be made of special materials. Each piece of Fu Lu seemed to contain boundless power. He had clearly dropped it just now. Why did he deny it? The young official had already walked far away. The envoy of the Yin Kingdom seemed to have realized something. He suddenly raised his head, and his breathing began to quicken. Li Mu left the palace. He didn't go home. Instead, he went outside the city. Outside the city gate on the west side of the divine capital, there was a wide open space. The craftsmen of the Ministry of Works were busy. A super large cultivation market was about to be built here. The major sects and cultivation families of the ancestral state were invited to move in. The purpose was to provide convenience for the cultivators of the ancestral state. They didn't have to travel thousands of miles to Xuanzong every 5 years. In the divine capital, they could exchange for or buy the cultivation supplies they needed at any time. The imperial court also wouldn't charge them 30 to 50% of their turnover. They only had to pay a certain amount of taxes on time, and they could continue to operate here. On the open space, the craftsmen of the Ministry of Works were very busy. This time, the deadline was tight and the task was heavy. They needed to build a super large market in a month's time. Such a huge project would have taken at least half a year to complete in the past. However, the imperial court was very fast this time. Within a day, the 3 provinces passed a resolution on the project. The Ministry of Revenue's funds were also sent in immediately. The craftsmen of the Ministry of Works came overnight to measure the site. Li Mu checked the progress of the project before returning home. When he was in Xuanzong, he promised the cultivators 3 months. Of course, Li Mu's goal wasn't to make a small profit, but to attract business. He hoped that when the cultivators of the Zhou continent came to the divine capital 3 months later, they would be attracted by the bigger, more convenient, and cheaper cultivation market. They would completely forget about the wealth exchange in Xuanzong. Although he wanted to immediately let Xiao Bai take revenge, he was still far from being able to face Xuanzong head-on. He could only weaken Xuanzong from the side and look for an opportunity later. In these 3 months, Li Mu recruited the heads of the Fu Lu school. They couldn't guarantee a 100% success rate for creating high-level Fu Lu talismans, but they could for low-level Fu Lu talismans. Li Mu kept the Fu Lu talismans above the earth level for himself. Those below the earth level were handed over to them. For the next few days, Li Mu stayed at home to draw talismans. On a flying boat from the Great Zhou to the Yin Kingdom, a man touched the Fu Lu in his arms with an anxious expression. He didn't hesitate to overdraw his mana to increase the flying boat's speed to the maximum. Yin Kingdom, Yin Capital. Recently, a major event happened in the Yin Kingdom, causing the citizens of the Yin Kingdom to panic. The famous Zhao family of the Yin Kingdom recruited a few powerful cultivators from somewhere and rebelled against the royal family. After defeating the royal family's guards, they forced the royal family into the palace. Until the royal family activated the protective array, the two sides were in a temporary stalemate. Several figures floated in the air and attacked the array that covered the palace. The light of spells illuminated the entire sky, but the array didn't show any abnormalities other than shaking slightly. The head of the Zhao family flew into the air and said to a middle-aged man, "Elder, the royal family bought this array from the spirit array sect at a high price in the early years. It is said that it can withstand the attacks of powerful cultivators from Dongxian." The middle-aged man looked down at the array outside the Yin Kingdom's palace and said calmly, "It can withstand the attacks of a 6th-level cultivator, but without a 6th-level cultivator, it will take a few days to break this array." The head of the Zhao family said, "I am worried about the Great Zhou court. The royal family must have asked the Great Zhou court for help. If the Great Zhou court sends troops," the middle-aged man said, "don't worry. This is a matter of the Yin Kingdom. The Great Zhou court will not send troops. If they do, the sect will not sit by and watch." The head of the Zhao family breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Then I am relieved." Inside the array, the royal family of the Yin Kingdom looked at the figures floating in the air with bitter expressions. An elder sighed and said, "I didn't expect Xuanzong to make a move. To deal with a small country like the Yin Kingdom, they sent several elders. They want to slap the Great Zhou's face, but the Yin Kingdom has suffered an unexpected calamity." The middle-aged man in the imperial robe said, "Now, we can only place our hopes on the Great Zhou court." The elder shook his head and said, "The Great Zhou court will not send troops. When the array is broken, the Yin Kingdom will change hands. We can only hate the fact that the Yin Kingdom is so weak that we can't even control our own destiny." Although the array bought by the royal family of the Yin Kingdom from the Spirit Array sect was strong, it could not withstand the continuous attacks of several 5th-level cultivators. In just 2 days, the array was at its limit. The head of the Zhao family floated in the air and looked at the array that was trembling violently under the attack of spells. A trace of passion appeared in his eyes. The Yin Kingdom would soon be under the Zhao family, and at most a few hours, the array would be broken. However, at this moment, a ray of light suddenly approached from afar. It was a flying boat. The head of the Zhao family was no stranger to the flying boat. He was the Yin Kingdom's permanent envoy to the Great Zhou. Only the envoy returned. The head of the Zhao family understood that the Great Zhou must not have sent troops. The smile on his face grew wider. As the smile appeared on his face, a rolling sound came from the front. "Die, renegade!" The envoy stood at the bow of the boat and threw out a few Fulu notes. Suddenly, several figures in golden armor appeared in the air. They held huge weapons and exuded an extremely powerful aura. The head of the Zhao family was stunned. He said in shock, "What is this?" Looking at the golden-armored soldiers, the few Xian sect elders were also stunned. When they came back to their senses, the elder in the lead immediately said in horror, "It's a level 6 soldier. Retreat, retreat quickly." The news from the Yin Kingdom reached the fairy's capital 5 days later. In the Yin Kingdom, the Zhao family rebelled and forced the emperor to abdicate. In the end, the Zhao family was suppressed by the royal family. Because of the serious crime of rebellion, the entire Zhao family was executed. Only the son, Zhao Qingyuan, who was in Xuanzong, escaped. In the Li residence, Li Mu peeled an orange and fed Xiao Bai and Wang a slice each. That Qing Chengzi should be able to understand part of the pain that Xiao Bai went through now, right? In Xuanzong, Qing Chengzi knelt on the ground with a blank expression. He had yet to recover from the heavy blow. His family failed to seize power and was executed by the royal family of the Yin Kingdom. Now, he was the only member of the Zhao family who was still alive. How could this be? How could this be? The Yin Kingdom was only a small kingdom. The most powerful person in the royal family was only at the 5th level. This time, the sect directly sent 5 5th-level elders. How could this fail? How could his family die? Dao Chengzi's face darkened. He asked what happened. A 5th-level elder who came back from the Yin Kingdom said in grief and indignation, "It's the Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seal, a heaven-level Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seal. The royal family of the Yin Kingdom summoned 3 6th-level Divine Soldiers. We were no match for them at all. If they didn't intend to let us go, all the disciples would have died in the Yin Kingdom." Miao Xuanzi gritted his teeth and said, "Fulu School. It must be the Fulu School's interference. Other than them, who else can draw a heaven-level Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seal? The Fulu School forbids the sale of offensive heaven-level Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seals. How dare the Fulu School break the rules? A Golden Armor Talisman could temporarily summon a 6th realm Divine Soldier. With such a high-level combat power, it could easily annihilate most of the small and medium sects in small and medium countries, causing great chaos. Therefore, none of the Taoist sects were allowed to sell heaven-tier offensive talismans. This was the consensus of the 6 sections. Miao Xuanzi said coldly, "I'll go ask Xianjizi and see how he explains it." He came to a Taoist palace and sat on a white jade chair. After activating it with his mana, Xianjizi, who was preaching to his disciples in the Taoist palace on the main peak of the Fulu School in the north region, felt something and waved his hand. In the center of the Taoist palace, an illusory figure appeared out of thin air. Xianjizi looked at the illusory figure below and asked, "Miao Xuanzi, what brings you here so suddenly?" Miao Xuanzi asked in a deep voice, "Xianjizi, don't play dumb with me. Did your Fulu School give the Yin Kingdom a few Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seals? You should know that this kind of Fulu is forbidden to be sold." Xianjizi denied. "Our sect has never sold the Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seals." Miao Xuanzi snorted. "Do you think you can recognize it? Other than your Fulu School, which other sects and families can draw heaven-level Fulu and heaven-level Golden Armor Fulu at that?" Xianjizi shook his head. "Our sect has never sold the Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seals. But a few days ago, junior brother Ling Jizi sent a message saying that the few high-level Fulu he carried with him were stolen. Perhaps it was the thief who stole them and sold them. It has nothing to do with our Fulu School. Lost?" Miao Xuanzi said angrily, "Xianjizi, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid?" Xianjizi looked at him and said lightly, "The runes of the Golden Armored Divine Soldier Seals can be found in any introductory book of Talisman Taoism. The world is so big that there are hidden dragons and crouching tigers. It's normal that a master who is good at Talisman Taoism can draw this kind of talisman. Without any evidence, don't blame our Fulu School for everything. Do you think that Xuanzong must be behind someone in the Yin Kingdom's rebel army who used high-level Taoist magic arts?" Miao Xuanzi's lips moved, but he was speechless. Finally, he waved his sleeves, and the projection gradually dissipated. Seeing him disappear, Xianjizi took out his voice-transmitting celestial artifact. After activating it, he said, "Junior brother, next time this kind of thing happens, remember to use a Fulu that they have never seen before. Once the Golden Armor Divine Soldier Seals are used, everyone will know it's our Fulu School." Chapter 543. Li Mu was the cause of the Yin imperial family's calamity. Even if the great Zhou couldn't send troops to help, Li Mu wouldn't just sit by and watch. The 6 Taoist sects were detached from worldly affairs and never participated in worldly struggles for imperial power. It was Dao Chengzi who broke the rules of the cultivation world first, so Li Mu couldn't be blamed for his carelessness. In fact, Li Mu already knew that Fulu weapons above the heavenly level were prohibited from being sold. This was the consensus of the 6 sections. The Golden Armor Talisman wasn't like the Creation Talisman. Although both Fulu weapons were at the heavenly level, one could save lives while the other could take lives. Having a heavenly level golden armor talisman was equivalent to having a powerful cultivator from Dongxian who could destroy more than half of the small countries in the south. If this kind of fulu could be bought with money, the cultivation world would be in complete chaos. However, Li Mu didn't accept the money from the Yin imperial envoy, so it wasn't considered selling. Moreover, he was standing on the side of justice and had a clear conscience. The Zhao family's rebellion had been destroyed, and Xuanzong was at his wit's end. If Dao Qingzi was crazy enough to send a sixth realm elder to interfere with the Yan's affairs, all the countries in the Zhu province, including the Great Zhou, would unite to resist Xuanzong. The imperial courts of the various countries and the Taoist sects had always minded their own business. No matter which country it was, the imperial court didn't want to have a power above their country. Even the Great Zhou wouldn't interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. Li Mu and Xuanzong had been at odds ever since Dao Qingzi chose to protect Qing Qingzi. Unfortunately, he didn't have a Dao integration cultivator by his side. Otherwise, he could have led his men to Xuanzong's mountain gate and forced them to hand over Qing Qingzi. Li Mu also realized that his own strength and that of the Fulu school were still too weak. Otherwise, Xuanzong wouldn't have dared to offend the Fulu school for an inner disciple. All along, every step he took had been smooth sailing. The conflict with Xuanzong was his first major setback. Xiao Bai's enemy was in Xuanzong, but Li Mu couldn't avenge her. These days, he had been blaming himself. This was probably the first time that Li Mu was so eager to improve himself and the people around him. The cultivation market in the divine capital had to be set up successfully. Li Mu needed enough spiritual jades and spiritual herbs to raise the overall cultivation of the talisman sect's disciples to a whole new level. At the very least, in terms of a number of middle and high-tier disciples, they would not lose to the profound sect. As for the 8th realm cultivators, there was no way. Over the past 10,000 years, the spiritual qi in this world had become thinner and thinner. It was no longer possible for a 9th realm cultivator to be born. Even 8th realm cultivators were hard to come by. Other than Tianjizi of the Xian sect, there was no other 8th realm cultivator in Taoism. The only sect that could have an 8th realm cultivator was the demon sect. However, Li Mu couldn't work with the demon sect. This notorious organization was the enemy of all righteous sections. Fortunately, the only person on the continent who had a chance of reaching the 8th realm was one of Li Mu's closest people. Today, the Empress was wearing a piece of clothing that Li Mu gave her. She leaned lazily on the dragon throne and read the latest novel. As the continent's youngest 7th realm cultivator, Li Mu hadn't seen her cultivate. If the Empress had an 8th realm cultivation, why would he need to work so hard to accumulate strength and wait for Xiao Bai to avenge her? He would have brought people to fight Xuanzong long ago. He felt Li Mu's gaze. She put down her book and asked, "Why are you looking at me?" If the Empress was willing to work hard, he wouldn't have to. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "There's no point in always reading. Why don't your Majesty cultivate and try to break through as soon as possible?" Inside Xuanzong, inside a Taoist palace, Qing Qingzi knelt on the ground with a crazed expression. He gritted his teeth and said, "Grand Supreme Elder, the Yin Kingdom's royal family humiliated our Xuanzong. I beg you to send the chief elder to the Yin Kingdom to kill the Yin Kingdom's royal family and raise the prestige of our Xuanzong." Dao Qingzi glanced at him and said, "Take him away and make him face the wall for 10 years. He's not allowed to step out of Discipline Peak for 10 years. Qing Qingzi was obviously crazy. If he killed the Yin Kingdom's royal family, Xuanzong would become the most powerful sect of the evil Dao. This was not what Dao Qingzi wanted. The 4th-generation core disciples in the palace watched Qing Qingzi being taken away. Qing Xuanzi's face was even paler than Qing Qingzi's. He was glad that he didn't fight Li Mu to the death. Otherwise, he would have been the crazy one. Dao Qingzi sat on the main seat. He closed his eyes and said, "You can all leave." The disciples bowed and left the Taoist palace. When Dao Qingzi was the only one left in the palace, the door of the Taoist palace slowly closed. Darkness shrouded Dao Qingzi. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Dao Chengzi's ears. Are you angry and unwilling to accept this? Dao Chengzi's expression changed. He shouted, Who is it? Come out. He scanned with his divine will, but didn't find a second aura. At this moment, the voice sounded again. Don't look for me. I'm in your heart. You're me, and I'm you. Dao Chengzi had cultivated for more than 100 years. He knew what he had encountered. Even with his cultivation and temperament, his face couldn't help but turn pale. The voice continued, I know you're angry and unwilling to accept this. Among all the disciples, you're the most talented. You were the first to reach the creation realm, the first to step into Dongxian, and the first to transcend. However, your biased master still passed the position of sect master to someone else. You thought that if you were the sect master, Xuanzong would have been better than it is now, the voice laughed. However, when you took control of Xuanzong, you realized that things weren't like that. As the Grand Supreme Elder, you were humiliated by a Fifth Realm Junior in front of countless cultivators on the Zhu continent. Xuanzong's dojo was taken away, the outer sect disciples were expelled, and the inner sect disciples were ostracized by the demon race. You're in charge of the strongest sect in the Zhu province, but you can't even do anything about a small country. Your life is a joke. Dao Chengzi's eyes were bloodshot. He said furiously, Shut up. I'm the Grand Supreme Elder of Xuanzong, a seventh realm cultivator. I'm second only to one person and above millions. The voice laughed even louder. Do you believe what you're saying? If you don't think you're a joke, why would I appear? Even if you have everything you want now, you can't even do anything to a junior. Isn't this a joke? Shut up, shut up, shut up. In the Holy Ji Palace at the highest point of the Xian sect, angry roars could be heard. Countless disciples of the Xian sect looked up and were terrified. They did not know why the Grand Elder was so angry. When the headmaster was here, such a situation had never happened. They didn't know when the sect master would return. They really didn't know what kind of path the Grand Supreme Elder would make Xuanzong walk on. Just as the Xuanzong disciples were thinking about their sect master, Miao Yunzi, the Xuanzong sect master, was meditating in a silent space of the flask heaven. At a certain moment, he opened his eyes and looked at the old man opposite him. He asked, Marshal Granduncle, why didn't you follow the sect rules and hand Qing Qingzi over to the Fulu school? What did you see? The old man was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, Catastrophe. Miao Yunzi's eyes narrowed. Marshal Granduncle Tian Jizi had predicted 2 catastrophes for the sect. If it weren't for his warning and the sect being prepared, Xuanzong would have already been destroyed by the demon Dao. It was because of this that the Xuanzong disciples trusted him so much. Miao Yunzi took a deep breath and asked, What kind of catastrophe? The old man said slowly, The fall of the dynasty, the end of the 6 sects, the collapse of the 10 continents, a world-ending catastrophe. Miao Yunzi asked in shock, Just because Xuanzong handed Qing Qingzi over? The old man said, This is the mystery of fate. A market that could accommodate hundreds of shops couldn't just have one Fulu pavilion. The imperial court needed to attract important businesses, such as the Pill Cauldron sect, the Spirit Array sect, the South sect, the North sect, and so on. If they could get the support of these 4 sects, they wouldn't have to worry about the market's future customers. The problem was that the Great Zhou court was obviously making an enemy out of Xuanzong. The Fulu school and Xuanzong had shed all pretense of cordiality, but the other sects hadn't. After all, the Taoist sects were one family. They couldn't help outsiders against their own family for a little benefit, even if the imperial court took 20% less of their profits than Xuanzong. If they couldn't convince these 4 sects, then the market that was about to be built in Luoyang would be a joke. Li Mu didn't have any relationship with these 4 sects, nor did he have such great influence. He could only place his hopes on Xian Jizi. For this reason, Li Mu personally returned to Mount Baiyun to discuss this matter with him. Hearing Li Mu's words, Yuzinzi shook his head and said, This is very difficult. The other four sects have no enmity or grudge with Xuanzong. The Great Zhou and Xuanzong are at loggerheads. They won't help outsiders and offend their own sect. Apart from our relationship with the Pill Cauldron sect, we don't have too deep of a relationship with the other sections. On the contrary, Xuanzong has a lot of contact with them. Li Mu had anticipated this situation before he came. He could only say, let's convince as many as we can first. The relationship between the Fu Lu school and the Pill Cauldron sect was indeed a bit closer. Back in Xuanzong, Li Mu and the Pill Cauldron sect's senior sister, Jade Sun, chatted happily. Once, the Fu Lu school even wrote a heavenly secret talisman for the Pill Cauldron sect. Li Mu had even comprehended the heavenly book of the Pill Cauldron sect. Xianjizi thought for a moment and said, then junior sister, you go and contact senior sister Wuchen. Yuzenzi looked at him with a strange expression but didn't say anything. He left the Dao Palace. Li Mu knew that the six sects had a special magic item that could transmit projections over long distances. The six sects often used this method to hold important meetings. Not long after Yuzenzi left, he came back and said to Xianjizi, senior sister Wuchen said that if you want to discuss this matter, she wants you to go to the Pill Cauldron sect personally. Xianjizi said decisively, nonsense. If the headmaster of a sect could leave the sect at will, I would have gone with you to Xuanzong last time. You go to the Pill Cauldron sect in my place. Yuzenzi shook his head and said, senior sister said it very clearly. If you don't go to the Pill Cauldron sect personally, there is no possibility of discussion. Li Mu instinctively felt that there was something hidden in this matter. Xianjizi seemed to be very resistant to going to the Pill Cauldron sect. Before he could ask, Grand Elder Tanyangzi walked in from outside and said to Xianjizi, you go. In the past, we two old fellows weren't here. Now that we two old fellows have returned, even if you leave the sect for a year and a half, nothing will happen. Xianjizi still wanted to say something, but Grand Elder continued. Our Fu Lu school and Xuanzong have already reached this point. As the headmaster, you should think more about the sect. Xianjizi was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, disciple understands. Li Mu had never seen Xianjizi like this. Seeing him leave with a heavy heart, Li Mu was suspicious. He asked Yuzenzi, what happened to senior brother? Yuzenzi shook his head and said helplessly, because the Pill Cauldron sect senior sister Yuzenzi likes senior brother, and senior brother wholeheartedly wants to revitalize the sect. He doesn't want to be burdened by love affairs. Senior sister Yuzenzi's talent is outstanding, but because of this, she is unable to transcend. Li Mu finally understood why, when he and Xuanzong had a conflict, Xianjizi got the news from Yuzenzi. However, to be honest, love affairs will indeed affect cultivation and the revitalization of the sect. If one only knew how to talk about love every day, how could one have time to cultivate? How could one have time to plan the future of the sect? No one knew this better than Li Mu. Being immersed in the land of warmth and tenderness all day will greatly breed laziness. Perhaps the Pill Cauldron sect wanted to facilitate the two of them to become Dao companions. Li Mu didn't know whether Xianjizi didn't like Yuzenzi or was worried about the sect. If it was the former, then Li Mu also didn't want him to sacrifice himself for the sect. Feelings can't be forced. After all, Xianjizi wasn't a lecherous person like Li Mu. Forcing him to spend his life with a woman he didn't like was rather too cruel. Li Mu walked out of the Dao Palace and saw Xianjizi standing alone at the edge of a distant cliff. The mountain wind blew his Dao robe, making this figure appear particularly lonely. Li Mu walked to the edge of the cliff and said, regarding senior apprentice sister Yuzenzi, what does senior apprentice brother think in your heart? Xianjizi said deeply, before master's lifespan ended, he gave the Fu Lu school to me. What I bear is not a love affair, but the rise and fall of the sect. As the headmaster, I must live up to the responsibility on my shoulders, live up to master's dying wishes, live up to the ancestors of the Fu Lu school, and revitalize the sect. Standing together with Xianjizi, Li Mu suddenly felt somewhat ashamed. He was also a disciple of the Fu Lu school and the future headmaster, but he didn't have the same sense of responsibility and mission as Xianjizi. He never took the initiative to think about doing anything for the Fulu school. To strengthen the sect, to fulfill the wishes of the ancestors, to make the Fulu school the #1 sect of the Tao. For someone like him, who controlled countless resources, this clearly wasn't too difficult a matter. Li Mu took a deep breath, and in his heart, he strengthened a certain belief. He looked at Xianjizi and said, "If senior apprentice brother trusts me, then hand the sect over to me. I will do my best to revitalize the Fulu school." Xianjizi suddenly turned around and walked towards the Tao Palace in large strides. He said, "Senior apprentice brother, change your clothes. You also prepare to go to the Pill Cauldron School." Immediately, Li Mu stood in the mountain wind, looking at Xianjizi's back as he left with large strides. His expression was somewhat chaotic. Chapter 545. Li Mu suspected that he had fallen into Xianjizi's trap. It wasn't the first time he wanted to be a headmaster who didn't do anything. When he saw Xianjizi driving the spirit boat towards the Danding sect at the fastest speed, he was even more certain of this idea. He was still too inexperienced and had accidentally fallen into the trap of these old foxes. But this time, Li Mu was willing to fall into the trap. He wanted to make Fulu school the #1 sect in the world, not to be above everyone like Xuanzong, but to not be bullied by anyone or any power. The Danding sect was located in the Liang state in the south of the Zhou continent. Although the Central Plains was vast and had more believers, the Central dynasty was also very powerful. Successive dynasties were very wary of cultivation sections. Therefore, Fulu school was in the far north, Xuanzong was in the far east, and the other 4 Taoist sects chose to establish their orthodoxy in the small southern countries. Liang State, Mount Jiuhua, Danding sect's ancestral court. On this trip to Mount Jiuhua, Li Mu and Yu Zhenzi were also accompanying sect master Xianjizi. The flying boat passed through the Danding sect's mountain gate and landed directly on the main peak. Li Mu had just seen from the sky that there were neat medicinal fields on each peak of Mount Jiuhua. The Danding sect started out by refining pills and relied more on spiritual herbs than Fulu school. Since the establishment of the sect, they had been growing all kinds of spiritual herbs. In the square in front of the Taoist palace in the center of the main peak, many Danding sect disciples bowed to them. Li Mu followed Xianjizi into the main peak's Taoist palace and saw several figures when he looked up. Most of the disciples of the Danding sect were female cultivators, and they were all good at maintaining their beauty. The elders didn't look much different from young women. Several female elders stood behind a woman who looked slightly older. That woman wore a crown on her head. She was the headmaster of the Danding sect, Wu Chenzi. Jade Sun stood behind Wu Chenzi. Ever since the 3 of them entered the Taoist palace, her gaze never left Xianjizi. Xianjizi cupped his fist at Wu Chenzi and smiled. "It's been a long time since we last met. Senior sister's cultivation has become even more profound." Wu Chenzi coldly looked at him and got straight to the point. "Xianjizi, today I can clearly tell you that if you want the Pill Cauldron sect to help you, you must become Tao companions with junior sister Jade Sun. Otherwise, you should hurry back to where you came from." Jade Sun grabbed Wu Chenzi's hand and begged, "Senior sister, don't do this." Wu Chenzi turned around and glared at her, saying, "You're not allowed to talk." Xianjizi smiled and said, "That's why I came today." All the disciples bowed and said, "Greetings, headmaster." Wu Chenzi stood in front of the Tao palace and slowly announced, "Just now, Elder Jade Sun has transcended." "What?" "Elder Jade Sun has finally advanced. With that, our sect will have 4 7th realms. Xuanzong only has 5 7th realms. Aren't we very close to Xuanzong?" Everyone in the dojo heard the news. Whether they were low-level disciples or elders, they immediately jumped for joy. The Danding School only had 3 seventh realms in the past. The 2 Grand Supreme Elders were nearing the end of their lifespans. If the sect leader hadn't advanced, there would only be 1 Supreme Powerhouse left after the 2 Grand Supreme Elders reached the end of their lifespans. They would immediately fall to the bottom of the 6 sections. Now that Elder Jade Sun had advanced, even if the 2 Grand Supreme Elders died, the overall strength of the Danding School wouldn't fall too much. Wuchen Zi raised her hand, and the dojo quieted down again. She looked at the disciples of the Danding School and continued, "There's one more thing. Elder Jade Sun has already become Dao companions with the sect leader of the Fulu School, Xianjizi. The Dao Companion ceremony will be held soon." The moment she said that, the dojo fell silent for a moment. Then, an even greater uproar broke out. Did I hear wrongly? Elder Jade Sun and the sect leader of the Fulu School have become Dao companions. This is too sudden. I've never heard of this before. The dojo was as noisy as a bustling market. These 2 pieces of news brought too much shock to the disciples of the Fulu School. An elder of the sect had advanced to the 7th realm and become Dao companions with the sect leader of another sect. 2 joyous events had come at the same time in one day. Many disciples were still in a daze. After announcing these 2 major events, Wuchenzi gave them some time to digest the news. She spoke again, "Peak heads, follow me in for a discussion." For this discussion, Wuchenzi and the peak heads discussed for 3 whole days. The disciples of the Danding School didn't know what the peak heads and the sect leader were discussing. However, after 3 days, the peak heads finished their discussion and returned to their peaks to warn the disciples. Elder Jade Sun was about to become Dao companions with the sect leader of the Fulu School. From then on, the Danding School and the Fulu School would be as close as one family. The disciples of the Danding School had to help each other in the future. They had to treat the Fulu School disciples the same way they treated their own disciples. Their 7th realm elder and the sect leader of another sect had become Dao companions. If the disciples of the 2 sects still held grudges against each other, they would lose face for their own sections. There was no need for the peak heads to warn them about these things. At this time, in the Daoist palace on the main peak, Wuchenzi said to a peak head, "Hung Yangzi, go down the mountain personally and pay a visit to the imperial family of the state of Liang and the sects and aristocratic families of the state of Liang that are on good terms with us. Ask them if they have any intention of setting up a shop in the Great Zhou Shendu." Li Mu knew very well that the ask that Wuchenzi spoke of was definitely not just asking. Although they were both part of the 6 great Daoist sects, the Danding sect's position in the state of Liang was completely different from the Fulu School and Xuanzong's position in the Great Zhou. Without the Fulu School and Xuanzong, the Great Zhou was still the most powerful country in the Zhou province. Without the Danding sect, the state of Liang was reduced to the bottom of the southern countries, not much stronger than the state of Yin and other small countries. As long as the Danding sect spoke, the imperial family of the state of Liang and all the sects and aristocratic families, big and small, would definitely give them face. Li Mu cupped his hands towards Wuchenzi and said, "Thank you, senior sister." Wuchenzi smiled and said, "2 sects and 1 family. This is how it should be." This time, Li Mu stayed at the Danding sect for longer than expected. The main reason was that Xianjizi didn't want to go back. He and Jade Sun were nowhere to be seen all day long. No one knew where they were going to be lovey-dovey. Added together, they were almost 200 years old. Now was the first spring, but their spirits were no less than those of young people. However, Li Mu couldn't stay here any longer. The support of the Danding sect was not enough. He still had to find a way to obtain the support of other powers. When Li Mu was about to leave, the space around him fluctuated. Xianjizi appeared beside him and asked, "Junior brother, you're leaving?" Li Mu nodded and said, "I'm going to the Yao country." The other 3 sects had no other choice. They could only use the Qianhu country to make up the numbers. There was no Yao country, but it was rich in spiritual medicine and minerals. These were resources that the cultivation world of the Zhou continent lacked. It wasn't easy for Li Mu to come out, so he wanted to see Huanji again. He didn't want her to think that Li Mu had forgotten about her after putting on his clothes. Before leaving, Li Mu didn't give up and asked Xianjizi, senior brother, "Do you have any junior sisters or senior sisters in the Spirit Formation sect, South sect, and North sect?" Xianjizi glanced at him and said, "Do you think I'm like you, having lovers everywhere?" Li Mu did not like to hear these words. If it were not for the fact that he had connections everywhere, where would the heavenly secret talismans that had been used to extend the lives of the two grand elders have come from? Chapter 547. Thousand Fox City. The diligent queen hadn't attended morning court for 3 days. It was almost noon when Li Mu woke up from the bed in the harem. Phantom Princess was still sleeping soundly in his arms. The six-tailed fox demon's seductive skills were irresistible. He had been trapped in the fox's seductive attacks for 3 days and 3 nights. However, Li Mu didn't forget that he was here for serious business. He couldn't indulge himself like this anymore. Li Mu decided to keep a distance from this seductive body for the time being. Phantom Princess suddenly turned over and pressed her soft body tightly against his. Li Mu changed his mind at the last minute. From tomorrow onward, he would keep a distance from her. Thousand Fox City, in front of the palace. Commander Hulu just told the demon officials that the morning court was canceled again. The queen hadn't attended morning court for 5 days. The demon officials could only return to their offices. At this time, Li Mu wasn't sleeping in the bed in the harem. Instead, he was making jade slips. He gave Phantom Princess the heavenly book of the demon race to recruit the big and small demon races. However, it was too difficult for them to comprehend it on their own. Many demons couldn't comprehend anything at all. Li Mu simply engraved the contents of the heavenly book on a jade slip like he did with the Pill Cauldron sect. He asked her to teach it according to the demon race that submitted to her. As for the heavenly book of the fox race, Li Mu had already given it to her. The lesson he learned from Xuanzong last time reminded Li Mu that he couldn't be strong alone. He also needed reliable helpers and a strong alliance behind him. In the future, he should supervise the queen's cultivation more. When she reached the 8th level, Li Mu could do whatever he wanted in the 10 continents and 3 islands. There was also Phantom Princess. The Heavenly Fox race was one of the top races. They weren't inferior to the dragon race. It wasn't good for her to indulge in beauty all day long. Li Mu walked to the bed and patted her smooth body. "Wake up. It's time to cultivate." Hulu had already made arrangements for the Qianhu Kingdom to open a store in the Divine Capital. Aside from spiritual herbs, the Yao Kingdom also had some specialties that human cultivators urgently needed. For example, the silk of the Silkworm Demon clan was a material used to make immortal garments. If sold to the Imperial Court or the Northern faction, they could be refined into immortal garments with defensive capabilities. This kind of clothing was extremely popular in the cultivation world. Hulu had already informed the Silkworm Demon clan to provide some silk every once in a while. Of course, the Silkworm Demon clan's treatment here would also be greatly improved. When Li Mu was inscribing the jade slip, Huan Ji was lying on top of him. Li Mu wanted her to cultivate, but she said that after he left, she would have plenty of time to cultivate. Li Mu could only let her be. After all, he did not have many opportunities to come to the Yao Nation. Huan Ji hugged him from behind and rested her head on Li Mu's shoulder. Sometimes she would blow on his neck, and sometimes she would kiss him on the cheek. She was completely a clingy little fairy. Suddenly, there was a sound of vibration in the storage space. Feeling the soft body lying on his back, Li Mu felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. When he discovered that it was not the Empress who was transmitting her voice, but rather the Talisman Sect's sound-transmitting magical tool, he was slightly relieved. Li Mu did not hide from Huan Ji. After activating the artifact, he asked, "Senior brother, what is it?" Xianjizi's voice was serious. "Junior brother, do you have 7 heart flowers and profound heart grass that are over 500 years old?" 7 heart flowers and profound heart grass were not particularly precious spiritual herbs, but anything over 500 years old even if it was just a stalk of green foxtail grass, was worth a lot. In Li Mu's memory, there was only one kind of pill that required both of these herbs. It was a type of pill called demon suppression pill. It was used by cultivators to suppress their inner demons. Li Mu asked what happened. Xianjizi said with a heavy tone, "A grand elder of the spirit array sect failed to break through and was invaded by his inner demons. It affected his mind and almost caused a disaster. Fortunately, the sect master and another grand elder were at the sect at the time. Using the mountain protecting formation, they worked together to control him. However, they also suffered heavy injuries. The people of the Spirit Array sect came to the Pill Cauldron sect to ask for a demon suppression pill. The Pill Cauldron sect lacks these two herbs." Li Mu understood the demon suppression pill, so he was very clear that the key to this matter was not the 7 heart flowers and profound heart grass. Although the demon suppression pill could be at least a mystic level pill, the demon suppression pill needed to be at least a saint level pill to be effective on a grand elder of the Spirit Array sect in the 7th realm. Refining a saint-level pill was as difficult as writing a saint-level Fulu, not to mention the Pill Cauldron sect. Even Li Mu himself might not be able to refine it. He could only say to Xianjizi, "I'll try my best to find it." Li Mu, an illusion princess, searched through the treasury of the 1,000 Fox Nation and Illusion Princess's personal treasury. They found many 7 heart flowers and profound heart grass, but they were far less than 500 years old. Spirit herbs that were over 100 years old would emit dense spirit chi and attract cultivators, monsters, and even wild beasts. Six of them were red, and one was pink. Every 100 years, one of the 7 hearts flowers would turn red. 6 red flowers meant that this flower was more than 600 years old. The 7 heart flower had been found, and the mysterious heart grass was also found in the Blue Wolf King. However, its medicinal age was not high enough to be used as an ingredient for saint-grade medicinal pills. Li Mu and Huanji could only go to the mysterious snake clan to try their luck. When the Blue Wolf King heard that Li Mu and Huanji were going to the mysterious snake clan, he volunteered to go with them. The mysterious snake clan's territory was in a vast swamp basin. This was the best environment for the mysterious heart grass to grow. The entire mysterious snake clan's territory was covered in a layer of purple poisonous fog. Normal monsters would not be able to enter, but to Li Mu's group, this poisonous fog was nothing. The Blue Wolf King took the initiative to show off. Wherever he went, a gust of demonic wind blew away the poisonous fog. He asked, "Are we going to attack the mysterious snake clan?" Li Mu said indifferently, "No, we're going to ask if they have any 500-year-old mysterious heart grass." The 1,000 Fox Nation's focus was on development, not expansion. Without the monster corpses, they were not much stronger than the other 3 clans. They could not take over such a large territory. Oh, the Blue Wolf King flew in front. Li Mu poured a bucket of cold water on him. He felt that something was wrong. He had brought so many people with him. It was enough to destroy the mysterious snake clan, but he was only going to look for herbs. Was he going to the Celestial Wolf Kingdom for herbs too? The more the Blue Wolf King thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. He asked tentatively, "Then why did you come to the Celestial Wolf Kingdom, my lord?" "Li Mu, I originally came for herbs, but since you're so sincere, I'll take your soul blood while I'm at it." The Blue Wolf King did not speak again. Li Mu noticed that he slapped himself a few times. He probably would not speak casually in the future. The poisonous fog gradually thickened as the 3 of them flew. They could no longer see the sun when they looked up. Rugged rocks began to appear frequently in the swamp. Some of these rocks were dozens of feet tall, while others were hundreds of feet tall. They emitted a faint, demonic aura. The Blue Wolf King was getting impatient. After asking for instructions from Li Mu, he howled to the sky and shouted, "Jiu Tian, come out and see me." His aura spread out, and the low-level snake demons in the rocks nearby trembled. An equally powerful aura burst out from the swamp in front of them. In a dozen breaths of time, it arrived in front of the three of them. A thin man in white floated in the air. When he saw the Blue Wolf King opposite him, as well as Li Mu and Phantom Princess behind him, his eyes narrowed. He said warily, "Blue Wolf, what are you doing here?" Li Mu had a good impression of the Snake Clan. He smiled at the man in white and said, "We're here to ask the Snake King for a 500-year-old mysterious heart grass." The white-robed man didn't believe Li Mu's words at all. The ambitious Blue Wolf King had brought two powerful cultivators here just to ask for a single herb. Who the hell would believe him? This treacherous old wolf must be up to no good. The man in white let out a long howl. In the fog, countless auras closed in. Soon, they surrounded Li Mu, Phantom Princess, and the other two. These people were obviously the strong people of the Snake Clan. Their eyes shone fiercely. Among these auras, there were 2 6th-level auras and more than 10 5th-level auras. The man in white looked at the Blue Wolf King and said coldly, "Get out. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. You're not my match now." This time, to show his goodwill, Li Mu kept the spirit corpses in his cave abode. However, in this situation, a battle could break out at any moment. Even if the Snake Clan had the mysterious heart grass, they would not give it to him. Therefore, Li Mu summoned all the spirit corpses, 1 7th level and 10 6th level. The aura of the Snake Clan was instantly suppressed. Li Mu looked at the 9 Heaven Snake King and repeated, "We're here to ask the Snake King for a 500-year-old mysterious heart grass. We can also exchange for it with other spirit herbs of equal value." The 9 Heaven Snake King thought for a moment and slowly reached out his hand. A white light flashed in his palm, and a plant with a long leaf floated in his hand. The plant slowly flew towards Li Mu. The 9 Heaven Snake King said, "There's no need to exchange. You're a guest from afar. This mysterious heart grass is for you." Li Mu accepted the spirit herb and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Snake King." Then he waved his hand, and a jade slip flew towards the 9 Heaven Snake King. Seeing the group leave, a snake demon flew over and said in shock, "That seems to be the Queen of Thousand Fox Country, Phantom Princess, and the State Preceptor of Thousand Fox Country. The Fox Clan and the Wolf Clan are mortal enemies. Why are they with the Blue Wolf King?" The 9 Heaven Snake King looked in front of him in shock. He used his divine sense to check the jade slip and found that it recorded a Snake Clan divine ability that even he didn't know about. Although it wasn't very powerful, it was more than enough to exchange for a spirit herb. At this moment, he was full of questions. These people were really here to ask for spirit herbs. Why was the Blue Wolf King with the people of Thousand Fox Country? The strength of Thousand Fox Country was far beyond his imagination. Chapter 549. Mount Jihua. Li Mu hurried to Pill Cauldron School and handed the 7-heart flower and heavenly wool grass to Wu Chenzi. Guang Yuanzi of Spirit Formation School clasped his fist and said, "Thank you, junior brother. Spirit Formation School owes you a favor." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "It's my duty. Senior brother doesn't need to be so polite." Then she looked at Wu Chenzi and asked, "How confident are you in refining this pill, senior sister?" Wu Chenzi shook his head and said, "Even a Grand Elder wouldn't have a 10% chance of success." A 10% chance was almost zero. Li Mu thought about it and asked again, "What will happen if the refinement fails?" His question caused everyone to fall into silence. A 7th realm cultivator who failed to break through would have their mind taken over by the negative emotions of violence and killing. This was the most terrifying heart demon a cultivator would encounter. If these negative emotions couldn't be removed, the only way was to kill the demonized cultivator to prevent them from harming the world and causing even more serious consequences. A Grand Elder sacrificing his entire life for the school only to end up with such a tragic ending. It was hard to accept. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Why don't I have a try?" Wu Chenzi was shocked. "You?" Xian Jizi walked forward and explained, Junior brother has a rare 7 orifices heart. Fulu School's Saint Rank Fulu was drawn with his help. If he participates in the refinement of the demon's subduing pill, it might increase the chance of success. 7 orifices heart. Wuchenzi finally understood why the talisman puppet sect valued Ling Jizi so much. The heart of 7 orifices might not have an advantage over other physiques in terms of cultivation, but in terms of writing talismans, it had an advantage that no other physique possessed. Their hearts had 6 more orifices than others. They were born to be emotionless machines for refining pills and talisman writing. Wu Chanzi quickly understood Xian Jizi's meaning and said, "You mean, during the refinement, we can use his body to borrow our Yuan Shun?" Xian Jizi nodded and said, "There's no better way than this." Not long after Wu Chanzi left the Dao Palace, he returned with 2 old women. She looked at Li Mu and said, "Junior brother, these 2 are the grand elders of my Dan Cauldron sect. Their attainments in alchemy are unparalleled in the world. You can choose one of their primordial spirits to possess you." Li Mu looked at the 2 grand elders and decisively looked away. He said, "I have a better candidate in mind, so I won't trouble the grand elders." Wu Chenzi looked at Li Mu's departing figure and suddenly said to Guang Yuanzi, "Junior brother Ling Jizi wants to open a market in the Great Zhou's divine capital. The Alchemy Cauldron faction has already agreed to settle in the Alchemy Cauldron Pavilion there. If Junior brother Ling Jizi can refine the demon subduing pill, your Spirit Array faction will owe him a big favor. I'm afraid you'll have to do something." Guang Yuanzi was silent for a moment before he said, "Senior sister, don't worry. Regardless of whether the evil subduing pill can be refined successfully, the Danding sect will repay Junior brother Ling Jizi." Half a month later, in the Great Zhou's divine capital, the clear sky above the divine capital was suddenly filled with dark clouds. Lightning flashed within the dark clouds. To the people of the divine capital, this kind of weather was no stranger. They only looked up and continued with their own business. Several figures rushed into the clouds. Soon, the dark clouds completely dissipated, revealing the clear sky once again. In the palace, Li Mu personally handed a green pill to Guang Yuanzi. Guang Yuanzi was excited and said, "Thank you, Junior brother Ling Jizi." "Thank you, Empress of the Great Zhou." Li Mu smiled and said, "You're welcome. Quickly give it to the Grand Elders." He had never refined a Saint Grade pill before, so he first used a few Heaven Grade pills to practice. After all, there was only one set of ingredients, so he couldn't afford to waste them. As a result, although it took a long time, there weren't any problems in the process of refining the evil subduing pill. While he and the Empress were refining pills day and night, the Spirit Array sect had already set up shop in the market. Not only that, they also helped Li Mu rope in some sects and families of the Jing state. In addition to the sects and families of the Danding Pavilion and the state of Liang, as well as the Fulu School and the Great Zhou Court, they could already support a market. The market hadn't opened yet, but all the major shops had already started pre-sale promotions. There were all kinds of promotions and rebates. Every day, there would be free lectures from experts of the Fulu School, the Danding sect, the Spirit Array sect, and the Great Zhou Court. In a short time, it attracted countless cultivators from the central region. Xuanzong. The Great Zhou Court had completely fallen out with Xuanzong. In order to prevent the Great Zhou Court from doing anything harmful to Xuanzong, Dao Chengzi ordered his disciples to closely monitor every move of the Great Zhou Court. Naturally, the busy construction of the market outside the fairy's capital could not escape their eyes. Dao Chengzi tapped the armrest of his chair with his index finger. "Do they want to imitate me, Xuanzong?" Miao Xuanzi said, "Master, our sex exchange meeting is about to end. The Great Zhou Court's move is obviously to attract cultivators from a zoo continent. According to my investigation, the Fulu School, the Danding sect, the Spirit Array sect, and some other sects and families have already set up shop in the market of the Great Zhou's divine capital. It said that there are experts from various sects who preach every day. Xuanzong is the biggest sect in Taoism. They're too greedy. In the Taoist palace, Dao Chengzi's face was a little dark. Even though Xuanzong had opened up the market and reduced the commission of spiritual jades, independent cultivators, merchants, and cultivators attending the exchange were still leaving in large numbers. It was obvious that someone was fanning the flames. However, when Xuanzong wanted to investigate, the market in Zhoushandu had already been discussed by everyone. Within 2 days, 30% of the shops and stalls in the market had been emptied. When it came to the market, Xuanzong was already at a disadvantage compared to Zhoushandu. Xuanzong was far away in the EC. Its geographical location was not good, but Shandu was in the center of the Zhou continent. It had a unique advantage. Once the market in Shandu was established, who would be willing to come to Xuanzong? Dao Qingzi thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. Reduce the spiritual jades taken by the sect by another 10%. Shandu, Changle Palace. Under Li Mu's supervision, the Empress was practicing her art Dao to increase her strength. Li Mu was holding a simple and unadorned book that had mysterious runes written on it. In fact, as long as a market was established in Shandu, Xuanzong would not be able to do business. The geographical disadvantage could not be remedied by reducing the commission. Even if Xuanzong reduced the commission to the same level as the imperial court, or even provided a place for free, their business would still not be good if there were no customers. Without the market, Xuanzong would be able to obtain at least 70% of the cultivation resources. Since Xuanzong wanted to save face, he would make them lose face as well. After learning dragon language from Cheng Xin for a long time, Li Mu could now somewhat understand the Dragon King's diary. The contents of the diary were more exciting than he had imagined. This lustful dragon had slept with hundreds of races in the 10 continents. Li Mu was engrossed in the diary. Mr. Mei walked in from outside and said that someone was looking for him in the worship department. Li Mu put away the diary and went to the worship department. At the entrance, he saw the successor of Moism. Li Mu, who had once been an engineering student, had no difficulty in understanding these blueprints. The reason why the school of Moism was so highly regarded during the dynasty was because, compared to the other 6 factions, the school of Moism could be transformed into a war machine. The puppets and magical equipment they created could carry out the combat ability of high-level human cultivators, if not better. Most of the magical equipment was designed in the same way as modern weapons. The blueprint of the School of Mo was not a secret. The secret was the talisman array engraved on it. Li Mu put down the jade slip and said, "If this is all, it is not enough." Emoli was silent for a moment, then asked, "What else does the great Zhou court want?" Li Mu pointed a long cannon barrel and said, "The power of this thing is acceptable, but it can only fire 1 shot in a short period of time. It is not flexible enough. I need you to change it into a mechanism that can fire multiple shots." Emoli thought for a moment, then said, "Changing the talisman array and adding more grooves for embedding spiritual jades is not difficult." Li Mu continued, "These can only be used on land and in the air. The court also needs something that can be used in water." Emoli said, "This is easy. You can engrave a water-repelling array on the mechanism. These puppets are not powerful enough. The power of the puppets is related to the materials and spiritual jades used. The better the materials, the sturdier the body of the puppets, and the higher the defense. The higher the grade of the spiritual jades, the stronger the attack power of the puppets. The strongest puppets are comparable to Dongxian." Li Mu and Li chatted for a few hours in the Department of Offerings and returned home very late. He had high hopes for the Mo family's mechanism technique. He hoped that the successor of the Mo family would be able to create something useful for him soon. Manpower was not a problem for the court. Ever since the Shun Kingdom and the Northern Bang became independent, there was no need to station so many soldiers in the South County. Li Mu could transfer half of the soldiers in the South County to him. As for materials, the disciples of the corpse sect had been in Yingzhou for many years. In order to refine corpses, they often needed to survey the terrain and find a suitable place to raise corpses. During this process, they found many underground veins. Ores were the raw materials for refining Dharma treasures and mechanisms. The corpse sect was not good at these two things. The Fulu school and the court were not good at them either. Because they were far away in Yingzhou, it was difficult to mine and transport them. Li Mu had not touched them. The area of Yingzhou was not smaller than the Zhou continent. Who knew how many resources were buried deep underground? He simply asked Mo Li to bring those people to Yingzhou to study mechanism techniques and dig for ores. Even if he sent consecrators, they wouldn't be able to cover the entire area. As a result, it was difficult to eradicate the Wokou pirates in recent years. Li Mu's target this time was Wen Nation. Firstly, he wanted to deal a heavy blow to the Wokou pirates. Secondly, Ao Run's blood essence sensed that he was in Wen Nation. Although this flood dragon didn't know how to talk, he was still his subordinate. He couldn't leave him to fend for himself. Flying above the Eastern Sea, Li Mu thought of the Eastern Sea Dragon race. He thought of the sisters Xin and Ting Xin. Since the sisters returned to the Eastern Sea and were forced to cultivate in seclusion, they hadn't contacted Li Mu. Li Mu asked Chung Xin, "Do you know where the Eastern Sea Dragon race is?" Chung Xin shook her head and said, "The dragon race of the Four Seas has their own territories. They don't usually contact each other. Even if they're in the same sea, the dragon race won't gather together. Humans were social animals, but the dragon race wasn't. Every dragon had a strong sense of territory. Other than their family members, they would not allow other dragons to encroach on their territory. Fortunately, the number of dragons was very small, and the sea was big enough. The vast and boundless seabed was enough for every dragon to have a large enough territory. He didn't know where Chung Xion's grandmother's house was. He could only wait for them to finish their seclusion before contacting her. Li Mu and Chung Xion flew east along the sea and soon saw a piece of land. Wen Nation was an island country in the Eastern Sea. It didn't border the Zhou continent. For thousands of years, the Zhou continent had been changing constantly. Because of its location, Wen Nation hadn't been involved. They had always been fighting among themselves on a small island. They had never been noticed by the central dynasty of the continent. The map showed that the island country in front of them was Wen Nation. Li Mu asked Chung Xion to change back to her human form. The two of them flew to the territory of Wen Nation. Wen Nation was far away from the Zhou continent. Their customs were very different from the people of the Zhou continent. They wore strange clothes and had strange hairstyles. Even their way of cultivation was very different from the orthodox way of the Zhou continent. Wen Nation cultivators were good at the way of ghost. They would often raise a ghost at the beginning of their cultivation. Then, they would use some kind of secret technique to connect the ghost with their soul. Usually, the ghost they raised would be stronger than them. This way, they could fight alongside the ghost when they fought. It sounded very similar to the system of the corpse sect. However, if the corpses refined by the disciples of the corpse sect were destroyed, the disciples of the corpse sect would not be affected. If the ghosts of the Wen Nation cultivators died, they would also suffer a great backlash. When Li Mu attacked the Wen Nation pirates for the first time, he searched the souls of several Wen Nation pirates and understood the situation in Wen Nation in detail. In Wen Nation, the Divine Palace was the highest authority. Almost all Wen Nation cultivators obeyed the orders of the Divine Palace. The pirates who plundered the resources of the merchant ships in the Eastern Sea were Wen Nation cultivators sent by the Divine Palace. Wen Nation lacked resources. They relied on robbing to satisfy the needs of the Divine Palace. The greatest enemies of the central dynasty of the Zhou continent had always been the realm of ghosts and the Demon Nation. The imperial court had never taken Wen Nation's petty actions seriously. Li Mu had already figured out the strength of the Divine Palace. Other than a palace lord of the 6th realm and a dozen 5th realm heavenly priests, there were no other strong cultivators. In Wen Nation, A group of palaces sat on top of a mountain covered in snow all year round. This was the One Nation's divine palace. It was the holy land in the hearts of One Nation's people and cultivators. At this moment, angry roars came from the underground of one of the palaces. Damn it! Let me go if you know what's good for you. Do you know who my master is? He's a devil who kills without batting an eye. When he comes, none of you will be able to escape. I'm telling you, if you anger him, you won't be able to rest in peace. He'll kill your souls and turn your corpses into zombies. You can wait for your deaths here. A.O. Run's shoulder blades were locked, and he kept cursing. However, the One Nation cultivators guarding the dungeon couldn't understand him at all. They drank and ate raw fish and didn't even bother to look at him. A.O. Run's cultivation had been sealed. At this moment, there was only regret in his heart. He regretted that he had broken into One Nation alone for merit. If he hadn't been so arrogant, he wouldn't have become a prisoner. Footsteps came from the entrance of the dungeon. Several One Nation cultivators immediately stood up and bowed. Greetings, Palace Lord. A man with his hair tied back and a small mustache walked up to A.O. Run and spoke to him in the language of the great Zhou Empire. Have you made up your mind? Become my mount, and I will not kill you. A.O. Run said coldly, a dragon doesn't serve two masters. I already have a master. My master will come to save me soon. You better let me go now. When my master comes, it will be too late. The man smiled disdainfully. Fine. I'll give you a chance to send a message to your master. When your master comes, I'll kill him. Then I'll be your only master. He took out a sound-transmitting magical instrument from A.O. Run's arms and injected his spiritual power. Buzz, suddenly, the sound of something vibrating came into his ears. The man turned around and saw a man and a woman standing at the entrance of the dungeon. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.